Welcome back to Finding the Edge podcast. I'm Garrett Boyum, joined with Robert Fry and Garrett Baker.
Neither of us picked up.
Who's up? Who's up? Who wants to go? What?
With our frozen degrees of freedom between me and Robert there.
Yeah.
I don't even know if I used that right, but
yeah, I know, right? Well, we're playing around right now, so our
we're specificity.
We're
just engaging in some serious play. We're exploring the intro in a different way right now and seeing if it leads to anything. And that's exactly what we're talking about in this episode.
That's the intro right there.
Let's begin. Analyzing. Finding the edge.
So, like for this episode, we riff off of a video by Rafe Kelley, where he was doing an interview with John Vervaeke, and they're talking about why serious play is transformative. We discuss how this is applicable to baseball. In some ways, we're trying to help people adjust to this idea of like we can actually play and work and get things done and like grow, and it's not just this distraction.
Yeah, and I think I would challenge anybody listening to this to hopefully have a different idea of what play could potentially be versus like your typical idea of play, but this idea, which he gets into about serious play, which again is near and dear to my heart and my way of life and kind of the way I approach coaching, but just to look at it in a different light versus they're screwing around, so they're going and playing versus like we're still working in a way, but how we're aiming to interact with our work is through serious play and through some exploration. And as you'll see in the episode, this idea of repetition with variation and how that is actually probably a better version of or definition of play. So to me, this is a concept that can transform, one, your own practice, whatever you want to engage in, two, how you go and coach. I think this is an extremely, extremely powerful concept.
No, I mean, that's the thing is like this intro, even though we're going to chop it up, is more what I've been looking for.
Authentic.
Like just, yeah.
It seems like, Boyum, that you were allowing us to engage in serious play rather than following a structure for the intro.
Wow.
Which is what we've been trying to get to, right? Because this is we want something that's more alive, that's more ecological. And and two, like this is what serious play does, is it helps, it gives life to things. Because going back to like what we'll talk a little bit about in the episode when you'll see the episode was recorded a long time ago, with just me and Baker. So we're looking at the episode here, and I just noticed that this episode was recorded over a year ago. So
it's so good that it took over a year in the making.
Yeah, well, and two, it was initially recorded as Confessions of the Baseball Coach episode, but we're gonna port this one over to Finding the Edge,
which is hilarious.
So, yeah, I mean, and we're also like way different people than we were a year ago.
Yeah, I don't even remember who I was a year ago.
It's right.
I mean,
I think it's good that
honestly,
we recorded a little bit of an update, and then when we were doing the intro, we recorded a little extra with Robert, and in that we had a little clip from Inning by Inning where Augie Greedo talks about how like they don't say work baseball, they talk about let's play ball. And so to me, that's that whole, the essence of what Augie is talking about there is about imbuing this thing with actual life, like making it alive. And this too is, me, it plays off this another video that I love by Bruce Lee when he's working with a student or whatever. And I want to pull it up, but this is an intro, so we don't want to get too long-winded on it. But anyways, so the video is him working with a student, and in it, he's like, kick me. And the student throws a kick. And he's like, what was that? We need emotional content. And so like, that's kind of like, to me, emotional content is imbuing the thing with life. So, hopefully this episode is life-giving to you. I just, like this is where like what's hard
Hopefully
about
you
this
are
stuff.
reborn.
Right. Well, I mean, but here's the thing, right? Here's what's hard about this stuff, right? And then just even going back to the video, right? He talks about like Rafe is touching on something deep. This is why this episode was initially recorded as part of Confessions of a Baseball Coach, because you can go so deep here. And I think that's the thing that's hard for a lot of people in just our culture is like, that's so cliche. I hope this podcast, like, but I mean, that's really what it boils down to. I mean, like we can talk about passion or whatever it is, like we have to put it in different terms, but like, that's the thing of like people, it's more engaging, than just the, hey, let's talk about this in a factual way, Bueller type of deal. Like, so anyways, I hope you enjoyed today's podcast with Garrett Baker, Robert Fry, and Garrett Boyum.
Do you want to shout out Emergence?
Also, if you enjoy our content and would like to learn more about ecological dynamics, one of our favorite topics here on Finding the Edge, we encourage you to check out the work by Emergence. We got a great deal going on with them right now to get 7% off if you use the code EDGE7. They got a wide range of courses ranging from an extensive mentorship for those who really want to dive deep and get something a little bit more customized and unique to them. Unfortunately, the code doesn't work for that, but if you're looking for a great alternative, we recommend you check out the Movement Academy Intro. The Movement Academy Intro is a college-style course facilitated by the team members at Emergence. But if you're looking for something a little less intense, but yet more of a broad overview of these ideas and concepts, check out EcoD for Dummies. If you want something that has that gives you an overview, but as well as practical examples, check out the Practitioners Bundle, and you get 3 mini courses on the warm-up and how these ideas apply within the weight room and to speed and agility. So if you're looking for an edge in your coaching, check out the content by Emergence. Make sure to follow Emergence at Emergent Movement. Movement is abbreviated MVMT. That'll be their handle for all their social media. It's also used for their website, emergentmovement.com. You can find all their links to their social media and their website in the description below.
So yeah, I mean, what stuff did you guys pick up again? Baker and then Robert. I guess Robert, we should start with Robert because I mean that's the first I wonder, is that like your first time you've ever seen this video?
It is the first time I've ever seen
All right.
this video.
So what was your impression? What stood out to you?
I guess the first impression that stood out to me was like the idea of repetition with variation, and that's the biggest thing that stood out to me because in a training environment, or like if I'm doing something where I'm super hyper focused on a certain task, like I feel like there's less of growth if I'm hyper focused on the task rather than allowing myself to play around. And so like it reminded me of, oddly enough, me playing a particular video game called BioShock. And I'm a big fan of that game, but like the advantage with that was, and the reason why I like it so much is that game was like amongst the first to allow you to have a deep sense of exploration. Like you didn't have to be like, oh, you have to do this task, and this task, and this task. Like you can explore the world and allow yourself to solve that problem in the way you see in different variations. So,
and you can perceive multiple affordances or different affordances within the landscape.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's like, it allows you to kind of see a bigger picture is the way I'm kind of perceiving it. Is it allows you to see that like there's not just one way to do this. There's more than one way of doing this. And for one person it might be one thing, for another person it might be another. It's all just allow yourself to create that repetition with variation. So that's kind of the big thing I got out of that.
Yeah, I loved a lot of that, like what you picked up. I mean, because this is some of the like even with what you were saying of how when you are given the freedom to explore, and to me, I was thinking about like you may perceive affordances within the game that the designer didn't even think of, when you're allowed the freedom to explore and be in more of a, what I would like to call, when we're talking about video game design, more of a sandbox, right? Where you have more freedom to kind of do what you want or interact with it rather in the way that is more along your style, or, you know, that aligns with more of who you are and how you want to interact and how you, with the game. And you get to begin, like to you're saying, like you get to then try different things too. And the other element that I took out of that was you also begin to understand or appreciate more of the game through that exploration. When you find you make little discoveries about the game, you begin to appreciate the game even more. And through that, you get it, you come to a deeper understanding of how the game, or of the game rather, and how the game works, and have a greater and deeper appreciation for the thing that you're doing.
No, I mean, spot on, because it's the same concept of like how a deep sense of passion that's created when problem solving. So like a specific example is like my experiences with coding. Like I didn't follow like a structured path. I didn't go, you know, in classes at school. I didn't go, hey, you know, I got to do this, 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 and this. I just allowed myself to explore and like created different things. And I'm like, yeah, this is awesome, because, you know, I allowed myself that exploration and allowed myself to solve those problems.
So basically, like, you have a sense of ownership too, of like the stuff of what you did and whatnot. So I think that's the other part of it too, of when I look at an ecological approach, that we give players more ownership, or it creates a environment to allow, that facilitates for ownership, or for the player to have ownership over their development. And so that to me is what it sounds like you're talking about there, is like you had ownership over your learning, instead of it was something that was just given to you by somebody else. Yeah, I don't know if I articulated exactly how I wanted it to.
Yeah, no, I think.
But anyways,
I think you're spot on with it, because when you approach something with play, like, you're going to be able to go and navigate it in a different way if you approach it like, I need to do it perfectly, or the maybe guardrails are too tight where there's nowhere to go, and it gets really boring, and you don't feel like there's any ownership of that, because basically whoever was telling you the task or gave you the task basically guided you directly to the answer. And then, like, how are you supposed to have ownership of that? You can't.
Well, and two, to jump in real quick, it may not fit your personality or who you are. If that makes sense, right? Like,
Sure.
You know, like, that's somebody else's, you know, like, way of looking at it. And like, it may be their intention, but that's not your intention, or that's not like what you value, you know, and how you want to use it and interact with it. Sorry to cut you off. Proceed if you have more.
No, I think you're spot on. And I think, like, the video game idea is like perfect, because why do people like video games so much? Like, why? And I think there's more reasons than just this, but like, you look at like a game like Fortnite, like, that thing took off, and every single round is different. There's repetition with variation. You could play a bunch of games over and over and over. You get a bunch of repetitions, but every game, because it's so dynamic, since there's 100 players or however many players are in it, it's going to be different every single time. And how you aim to interact, like, you go this place this time, then you go to this place this time, there's gonna be a different gun. Even if you go to the same spot, there's gonna be a different gun there for you. There's gonna be different opportunities to explore the world in a different way. And that's where you kind of play around in different realms. And it'd be different if the game told you had to go here, then you had to go here, and it gives you parameters, but even the zone moves and changes where it's going to end. So you're exploring different ways. And I think that is what keeps it so engaging and wanting people to go back. And like, people are willing to invest so much time in it and play and play and play and get reps and reps and reps because of that, because of this repetition with variations. And I think, actually, I know, because I've done it with other people. But if you approach your own development in this way, where you have repetition with variation versus trying to get the perfect rep over and over and over, you're going to be more engaged. So learning's going to be higher, and two, you're just going to enjoy it more. Like you're gonna want to go back and do more. And like I think people have, just in my opinion, like he talks about, like everybody thinks it's just leisure and fun. There is crappy play, if that makes sense. Like you can just screw around and you can engage in this idea of crappy play where you don't pick anything up and you're just aiming to have a good time, have fun, leisure, let the mind go and not really worry about anything. But then there's this serious play where you're fully engaged, you're trying to pick something up. And that's where this repetition with variation comes in and where learning actually happens. And you can probably pick something up you never would have before if you didn't engage with serious play. And that's, I'll stop with this, but there's an Ito saying, he says, never leave the playground. And that's something I try to take to everything in my life, because if I approach everything like a playground, like I'm just going to explore in any way I see fit in the moment. And I'll find new ways to interact with that playground and I'll enjoy it and it'll be more fun versus like I have to do it this exact way and this exact time or whatever it may be and these exact guidelines, because then your creativity stifled, which again, think about the benefits of being creative, think about the benefits of having ownership and the benefits of just like literally just wanting to go do it because that is just one, you're going to get more reps, but two, you're going to get more reps in a bunch of different ways, which think about when it transfer the context. Context is always changing within games where everything's a dynamical system. So the value of that is so high.
I have something that's going to take me a second to pull it up. Been looking for it. I was like, Baker, keep talking. While I try to find this. Here we go. All I have to do is play the very first part, and you'll know exactly why I did this.
I'm not going to create a work environment. This is, you don't hear the umpire, and I know this is an old cliche, but when you start the game, he doesn't say, okay, let's work baseball. He says, let's play ball.
Like,
yeah,
that's exactly what you're talking about. I keep like, the game is, when we play baseball, we're playing a game. I know guys are getting paid lots of money at the professional level and all that sort of stuff, but at the end of the day, you get paid to play a game. And so guys don't get burned out, and so they play their best baseball. You have to keep it fun. You have to keep it in a game. I mean, because you look at, there are esports, right? Going back to video games, esports is now a thing, and there's lots of money in it. And there are people who are doing it professionally. Like, it just, we are in an entertainment industry. Like just plain and simple. That's what it is that we are doing, especially when you're talking about professional baseball. You are in the entertainment business. It's not any different than a video game in some ways. But it is different because I find I get frustrated when some coaches overcoach players and basically coach them as if they were playing a video game.
Yeah, but that's different. It's not the player. Yeah, it's not the players playing the video game. It's the coach playing the video game. That's the issue, right?
Yeah, with the players, right? You know, with real life players.
Yeah,
and it's like, no, I think we have to remember that, and that helps us get the most out of our players. Like, going back to the Rafe Kelley video and him talking about at the beginning, like, what makes a good coach? The first thing I think is the most important thing, to have a deep care for the person's, like, right in front of you, right? And so I think that's where everything else flows from there, right? If you have a deep care for the person in front of you and you want to see the best for them, part of your knowledge, because he had the tactical knowledge or the strategic knowledge or the content specific knowledge that you need to be able to help out that player becomes important, after that first premise. And so, that's where I see an ecological approach fitting very well with that, because you still, what the biggest struggle of when you have a deep care for the person in front of you is, how are you going to care for them? I think that's, like, we don't ask that question. We don't think about that too much, because sometimes how we care for them is like, we try to make sure that they eat their vegetables, type of a thing, like force them to have what's best for them, instead of instead of respecting their freedom. I think it's different sometimes, like, because Baker, you're working through this right now, and I'm working through this as parents, right? There are some times where it's like, no, you are doing this thing, right? Like you as a little 3-year-old, 2-year-old have zero concept, and I understand you want to just play and play and play, but you got to eat your vegetables. You got to eat food. No, you can't touch that. No, you can't do that right now. I have to teach you, and so I do have to, like, your freedom isn't unlimited, but at times I need to respect his freedom. You know what I mean? So there's this balancing act that we as coaches, when we care for our players, I understand both sides of it, of like, well, they don't know and we have to. And then, but I think as players get older, we have to respect their freedom more. And so that's one of the things I think when we're talking about having a deep care for the person in front of you, is respecting their freedom and building their freedom too. Like, because they're like, with the child, some of the things of like me disciplining my son is so that he can have freedom. Because if I let him chase every whim desire that he has, he won't have freedom. He will be a slave to every whim, every little flashy thing that flies in front of him. He won't have any self-discipline to resist those things. And so, like, but it still comes back to that element of like understanding that how this all feeds back into freedom. But you have to, as a parent, right? Like, kids are going to turn 18 or whatever and leave the house. Like, we have to let them go. Like, that's I think the other element of it.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm navigating that as we speak and learning it. But I think that's constraints on behaviors, right? Manipulating constraints. Mm-hmm. And I think it goes into a little bit of guided exploration too, which goes right into this idea of play. Like, you're not necessarily telling them exactly what to do, but maybe nudging them in a certain direction to go explore or interact with an environment in a certain direction based on the constraints we place on your child or your player in front of you. And I think that, again, that's where the ecological approach is so powerful, because you're considering the person in front of you, but you're also not directly telling because you think you know exactly what this person needs to go do. You'll skillfully place constraints within the environment to direct behavior or allow them to just go explore or interact with an environment in potentially a different way to go discover something and engage in some serious play over here and see what they figure out, because then they become their own unique, authentic version of themselves, which I think is what we need to get to at the end of the day. Not create these robots, but their own unique, authentic way of interacting with the world, which I think is not talked about enough, but extremely important. I think it ties right back into this. If you engage in serious play, you're probably going to go find that.
Absolutely. And it reminds me of, and I know Boyam's going to love this saying, but it reminds me of my community college mantra at Kankakee Community College. Shout out. Start here, finish anywhere. And so that really goes in the concept of, guided exploration. It's like, hey, here's your starting point, but we're going to allow you to go wherever you want to take your path, and allows you to, go from, again, it goes to like one person could be going from point A to point B, another person could be going from point A to point X. For all we know, it's just whatever that path creates for them, and allows exploration. Again, it leads into allowing that person, one, that creativity, but two, like, they'll be more engaged in the long run because they figured it out for themselves, rather than, oh, hey, you have to do A, B, C, then D, then E, then F. And it's like, at what point do they get into the idea or concept of like burnout? Oh, I got to do this. And then have that mindset of, rather than I have to do this, it's I get to do this.
Yeah, and it's not just forcing a mindset. It's actually allowing them to engage in a way where they actually get to, instead of like, just write it on your mirror. I get to go do this, and then cram it down their throat, which is kind of what we're taught as my background in sports psychology. It's kind of like, hey, just like, no, you have to switch you got to switch your mindset. That's all you got to do. Switch your mindset to, instead of have to, you got to get to. Well, if we change how they interact with the environment, they may actually say like, hey, I get to do this, versus like having to force them to switch the mindset, which maybe there's times that it's needed in some directions, but I think an actual engaging environment where you can engage in some serious play, you're actually going to be like, hey, I actually get to do this. I don't have to go do this. It's not work, it's play. It's a little serious play.
And I think too, going back to the utilizing constraints to help people find exploration. Sometimes too, going back to a little bit of the parenting stuff, it's not just manipulating constraints, but I find like oftentimes what I'm doing with my son is I'm educating his attention, or I'm educating his attention or intention. Sorry, educating his intention. And I think that's actually a lot of the times of like, hey, here's a constraint. Like right now, you can't be screaming or running around. So I have to re-educate his intention and try to take, give him something else to do, something else to focus on. And I think that's a lot of times too, of like, I will oftentimes to say to him, like, not right now. I'm not telling you not forever. And there might be a certain situation in which you can do this thing, but that thing is not right now, And so like, and it's trying to figure out how to help him attune to what is the specifying information in the environment that he can regulate his behavior on, that he can find a good fit, And I think that this is where, like, to me, like, I'm having fun parenting because like ecological dynamics is just, it's omnipresent, you could say. Like it works in all situations. And so like same thing with our players of like, sometimes we are trying to help them, like you're saying, like, okay, how do we adopt more of a get to mindset? And so how do we facilitate that? Or like once somebody is like, interacting with the environment and we don't see that behavior or whatever, like how do we help them by educating potentially their attention towards like some sort of information that will help them educate their intention more towards I get to versus I have to.
Yeah, no, for sure. And we probably should be careful not re-record the episode here.
Anyways, I hope you enjoyed today's podcast.
Since one of the topics that we like to explore a lot when it comes to coaching, and in some of our conversations, Garrett, we've talked about play and exploration, and I came across this video the other day, and I figured it might be something good to talk about, and how we can incorporate play into our own practice.
Yeah.
What makes a good coach, right? That's part of what I'm interested in. When I thought about this years ago, and I said, well, the first thing that makes a great coach.
So I think actually that's the better topic. What makes a great coach? It's been a minute since I listened to this, but I wonder maybe we should start there with that question. For you, what makes a good coach?
If I were to say, it's been an evolving topic a lot, and I think he'll get into it a little bit too. So I know we both have watched this video, but originally it was very much the guy with the best information. I think at least that was my vision, and that's what I chased. I chased like the best information and all these different theories and all these different ways to maybe apply these theories, and how can I make my players the absolute best physically. And then I won't even say just physically, I'd say mentally too. I mean, obviously I dove into sports psychology, got the master's degree, and I was like, all right, I'm going to give my players the best information. But at the end of the day, what I noticed is I may have the best information, but if guys aren't willing to listen or have a desire to truly, I guess, be coached by me, and I know that's a big Ido Portal topic. It's like when you find a good coach, you don't even care what he's teaching you. You're just going to learn whatever he wants to teach you. You're gonna pick it up. And what makes that so appealing? Why do you care? Even if it's not information you want to necessarily learn, if you find that good coach, you're going to want to learn from them. And I think one has to do with a relationship. I think it's the ability to connect deeply and then to speak in a way of connecting not just to, I guess, the surface level, but more deeply in terms of like, I know we could get into like a deep dive into like narrative and all that, but speaking into their lives in a manner of story and connecting to their lives in certain ways that is well beyond baseball or necessarily the craft. And I think that's become overly apparent. It becomes relationship and really speaking into that person's life in a way they can connect, not just on the baseball side, but in the life side. That's where I've kind of gone with it as far as what makes a good coach.
Yeah. And for myself early on, it was similar to you in like information, but for me, it was a coach that got their athletes to perform. And then the information, what was a part of that. But it was more technique focused, at least for me. Like my mind was focused on my guys are going to have the best technique. And because we have better technique, we're going to go out there and we're going to perform better than the other team. And so that's kind of the main thing that I was chasing more, was trying to learn the best techniques out there for ways of doing things. And now it's in some ways similar. I really like the quote, the best leader when his job is done, his aim achieved, the people or their players will basically say we did it ourselves. And so that has kind of been the kind of more how I've thought about it lately, is like, how do I get the athlete to have more ownership, to essentially I'm just there facilitating. How do I get them to basically like discover it for themselves, and I'm just facilitating. I think that for me, the hard part about that though is walking that balance, or at least I have this fear that by doing so, I will basically not be valuable, or the players or other coaches won't see me as valuable. Because if you're doing your job really well, you might not be noticed. And then how do you differentiate not being noticed because you're doing a bad job versus not being noticed because you're doing a good job? And so for me, that's one of the things that I think I'm struggling to figure out how to kind of bridge that. And I do think it's kind of goes along with what you were saying of really it's about relationships. And then if you build a strong relationship with the players, with the athletes, then, that in a way the players will value you. But I do think like a good coach is one that players look up to, that can connect with, and someone that they actually want to be around. But yeah, those are kind of my initial thoughts. I also think too, one other small ad before we continue the video, is a good coach gets you to think.
Yes.
And helps you connect things and discover new insights. So I guess that's what I'll add as we continue here.
Is actually caring deeply about helping the person in front of them solve their problem. The second thing that matters deeply is having the knowledge to help them. And the third thing is having the charisma that allows you to create the connection and and convince and persuade them to execute and to be present and to attend to the lecture. So
I think that's you got any good? I actually want to back that up and just do that one more time.
Yeah.
The thing that makes a great coach is actually caring deeply about helping the person in front of them solve their problem. The second thing that matters deeply is having the knowledge to help them. And the third thing is having the charisma that allows you to create the connection and and convince and persuade them to execute and to be present and to attend to the lecture. So very often the thing that makes somebody an extraordinary coach is much less to do with their awareness of the optimization of sets and rep schemas, more to do with their ability to get in deep rapport with the student or the athlete.
I think that's also.
So out of that, what what things stood out to you to start?
I mean, the first time I heard that, I was like, I literally did what you just did right there for everybody, is literally listen back to it. Because, I mean,
I might have to do it one more time.
yeah, it's literally that good. But I think it kind of comes back to the idea of the self discovery and guiding, and almost like having that charisma and that deep relationship and that rapport to guide that person into wanting to discover it versus just wanting. And I think I've struggled with this at times, where guys just want to be, a lot of times, just because how the culture is nowadays, they just want to be fed the answer, and they don't necessarily want to be taught, or they don't want to learn per se. They just want the solution. They want you to tell you how it's done. And kind of, it almost goes back to a little bit we were talking about, but they think they did it themselves. It's going to be a stickier skill. It's going to be a stickier whatever you're trying to teach them. And working on that self-discovery, how do you work? And this is something I've been playing with a ton. And how do you get to that charisma that wants them to learn and wants them to go and inspires them? I think is a good word we use a lot. Obviously, because I work at Inspiration Academy, that's like one of our big words, inspiration. How do we go out and inspire them to want and go and discover and try new things and play around with ideas and then work through this process versus, hey, I'm just looking for the answer. And a lot of it is very much a skill on the coach's side to be able to do that, have that deep connection, be able to learn to do that. And it's not easy. And there's a lot of times, like, they don't necessarily, the player may not want it. And that's something I've been playing with a lot. Okay, well, if the player doesn't want it, I now have to go find a new route to go have this person want to start their own journey and on this self-discovery path where they're trying to learn on their own versus just like, hey, wanting the answer, even if that's all they want and they're pretty adamant about that. And they keep I've had people dig in a little bit, just like, well, what is it? What do I need more? What do I need to do here? What do I need to do there? Versus, okay, well, let me start guiding you, and then you start going on this journey. You play with these ideas. So, I mean, I think he wraps that up so nicely on what actually makes a good coach. But playing with those concepts, I know you probably have, and I have. I've thought about them a lot, trying to like, okay, how do I work this in? How do I work this in with my own players? How do I get to that level? But I don't know what your thoughts on that.
So I love how you talked about discovery. I think that is the thing of like, how do we get them to have this desire to discover the answer for themselves? Like, this is this whole idea where coaches talk about, like, we want players who are passionate. Well, we have to facilitate that. I think a lot of athletes, given kind of like our societal background through the education system, etc., this joy of discovering things for yourself has in some ways been trained out of us, and I think that's where we have to figure out a way to help rekindle that. I know for myself, in some ways, that's when the system rewards you for the right answer, all you do is you just only want right answers. And then when it punishes you for wrong answers.
Yeah.
And so to help guys kind of discover the answers, you have to create a safe to fail environment where they feel safe to explore, to make mistakes, and then to kind of move on from that. I was trying to look up a quote from a book that I had just recently listened to on perception, and the note that I had picked up on it is that in order for people to actually understand things, they have to, and especially if we're talking about skill acquisition, they actually have to have a role in creating it. And so if you want to have guys take ownership of their own development, then you actually have to allow athletes to have a role in, or rather a say in, how their player development plan or what they do to develop as a player is. And so I think people sometimes take this in one of two ways. They may then go completely hands off, and then players don't feel like they have any sort of structure, or the coach goes too hands on and there's way too much structure and they don't have any freedom to have any input or say in terms of creating it themselves. And so the way that I think about it is I need to provide structure to allow the athlete to begin to explore, because if they have no idea what the concept is, in terms of like trying to discover, how do I go about trying to discover things? They may be paralyzed. Some guys may totally love it. I think the best analogy I can think of is one of my buddies who used to do political campaigns or was worked on a political campaign, traveled around the country. Because he didn't have a lot of money, he was always eating at Subway, and he got really sick of eating Subway. And he started saying to the sandwich artists, I think that's what Subway called them, make me a sandwich. Just believe in yourself. Make me anything you want. And there would be two types of responses. People who would completely freeze and just ask him, well, do you like this or that? And he'd be like, just make me whatever you want. And some people, though, he said, would just absolutely love it, be like, oh, sweet. All right. And they just go to town on it. So I think you're going to run into a similar thing with athletes. Some athletes are going to love it and they're going to be able to run with it. Other athletes are going to really freeze. And so you're going to need to give them some sort of structure to be able to begin to explore. And so that's kind of my thought in terms of trying to foster this desire for discovery. And this goes back to what I think Rafe was talking about at the beginning of building relationships. I think that's where I normally start. I always try to find out when I first talk to an athlete, I try to figure out like what are their main drivers or motivations when it comes to baseball? Like what are their goals and aspirations? And I think if you don't even know those basic things, it's really hard to help an athlete. Like because you don't essentially you're working with the athlete blind as far as like what their motivations are. And so trying to figure out like what are the main motivations for why the athlete is playing, I think really hampers your ability to connect with that athlete. So that's normally where I start.
Do you ever feel, or have you ever had the experiences, just kind of playing off of that? And there's a couple things like I'm kind of circle back to here, but first one, have you ever had athletes where you almost have to take them through a self-discovery process of what their aspirations are, even like why are they even playing in the first place? So I feel like I've had that right off the get-go where they don't even know, and then I almost have to guide them through a little journey of like, why are you even playing the game? What are you actually trying to accomplish? Why are you doing what you're doing? Why are you going through this training? Have you had any experiences of that? Kind of like having to take them right off the get-go into that self-discovery.
I mean, I've definitely experienced what you're talking about in getting kind of some vague answers.
Yeah.
And even as I was kind of describing this, I was thinking about what kind of other questions could I ask other than the standard, like, you know, how are you doing today type of a question. Yeah. You know, I view that question of, you know, like, what are your goals, you know, with baseball, you know, what are you hoping to achieve? I almost think too, then to go back to this idea of play, enchantment, asking like, what was one of your favorite moments playing the game? Like, and it could be playing the game or just like, what's, you know, tell me of one of your favorite baseball moments. And that might not even have to do with them playing the game themselves. That could simply be a baseball moment, something that they've seen another team, whether it's professional, little league, etc. And I think that would give you better insight into maybe what motivates them.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I
was gonna ask though too, like how have you thought about bridging that issue when you run into that?
Yeah, a lot of it I think is, I don't want to like make it sound like a cop-out answer, but conversation dependent and player dependent. And a lot of times it's more of like, I'm trying to facilitate a journey where I'm like very carefully in the moment, like trying to intentionally ask them questions of really trying to see. And I think one of them is what are some of your favorite moments? Like I've definitely gone down that route, like connecting to like the bright spots of baseball or maybe overcoming failure. And I've gone down that route a little bit. Something that makes you feel kind of like almost like the hero archetype in a way, like you overcame something within the game, and you felt this borderline heroism where you were the hero of the game, or like you did something great for your tribe or your team. So I think that becomes a big piece of it, since that's where I think you start finding meaning within the game, or why you're going about that. And that's like the question I always had with our group of pitchers last year at American International was like, first thing I would ask is like, why do you play the game? And I tried to do it in a group setting at first, and I got all those vague answers, and they were all really weak. And then we'd have conversations later on, and I was like, none of your answer. Do you think your answer would take you through? Now you're struggling real bad, and you're currently on a streak where ERA is 15 right now. Like, your girlfriend's not very happy with you. You guys are struggling in your relationship. You're having trouble back home, and nothing's going right. Do you think that answer would keep you in the game? And just kind of like, you think you would keep really pushing hard for the game and all these circumstances? And then you kind of get them at least thinking sometimes and start working down like, all right, why am I actually doing all this? Like, why am I putting other things aside to focus on this at the time? And then a lot of stuff uncovers. Sometimes they realize that they don't love it as much as they think, and they're just doing it because they're doing it. Other times it unfolds this beautiful picture of why they're actually doing this and what experiences have led them to this. And sometimes it's like, I'm doing this because I could be doing this, or I could be going down this path, and this is taking me away from that path. I've seen it. So it's been a lot of those conversations, honestly, like talking about building rapport and kind of fostering that relationship, like brings you into a deeper understanding of them. And then honestly, I usually get pretty open during that conversation as well. But those honestly are some of my favorite conversations that with athletes. Just like, why are you playing this game? What's the meaning to you? Like, why do you go through all the crap you go through in training, in the weight room, on the field, all this extra time? Like, it's borderline a job for you right now. You could be making money. Like, why this? So I think that's really fun, honestly. That's one of the fun parts of coaching, in my opinion.
No, absolutely. And it just reminds me of Simon Sinek's or Simon Sinek. I don't remember how you pronounce his last name correctly, but his whole book, Start With Why.
Yes.
And when you have a strong why, you're able to endure a lot of adversity.
Yeah.
And I think, one thing that I like about the game is that it gets us to face adversity in a oftentimes non I want to say life threatening, but like a non, like extremely like dangerous type of situation. And that's where I think the value of our sport is, because there's so much failure, because it is so difficult. And I saw that not a lot, but I saw that a little bit when I played. Like, we had a very talented underclassman come in, and he was always really good in high school, and he just ran into a little bit of struggle, and it was just hard for him because he was such a really good athlete. And so he ended up quitting and just running track because he was super fast. And I think that's where the game is humbling, in the sense that, I mean, they've been seen that plenty of times too, where a player is just really high on themselves, and then whether it's the next half of the season or the next season, then they get really humbled. And there's a level of having some respect for the game and in a way doing the things the right way. But I was going to go. Looping back to starting with why, and for me, why it's so useful to ask that question to find out what really drives a player is because then I can better help them. Like, I now understand, or can think of ways that I can actually connect with them to actually help them. So, for example, I've been asking our players, just getting to know them, what their aspirations are. And two, I even ask, like, post baseball, what are your aspirations, once baseball's over? And then especially for the ones that are looking to be coaches, whether that is a baseball coach or a strength coach, I'm like, hey, I have all these resources. If these are things that I can then start having more conversations with them, maybe about more of the theory. I was going to try to go for the word pedagogy, pedagogical. But anyways, we can start talking pedagogy and theories and all this sort of stuff, such like, EcoD. Because in some ways, I look at the next generation of coaches that are coming up. If you can give them, they're the ones that are going to actually be able to change more so than the older ones on a large scale. And so I kind of look at them as being like, oh, hey, I can actually maybe get you to look into EcoD, get you started early. Because I mean, again, I think we might have talked about this before. A lot of coaches coach based upon how they were coached and what they learned as players. And so trying to expand to set them up. Because I think one of the other things that I really struggled with, especially starting out, and why I went the strength and conditioning route, was I didn't see any good baseball mentors for me. It doesn't mean that there weren't good baseball coaches. I just didn't know of, outside of like the coaches that I worked with in college, I didn't know of a whole lot of other really good baseball coaches, local ones, that I could go kind of be mentored by. I did end up finding, where I ended up coaching high school, like he was a good baseball mind and all that sort of stuff. But it was really hard. And so that's part of the reason why I went the strength and conditioning route. Was there was just way more people out there. It felt like it was much easier to have conversations and like just reach out to people. There were a lot more clinics and all that sort of stuff. So I just felt like for me that area was a lot more progressive. I think that was the main thing too, was that it was a lot more progressive. It wasn't that there weren't a ton of baseball coaches out there. It felt like, at least where I was, being in Minnesota, that it just didn't feel like there were a lot of other good baseball coaches around me that were really pushing the edge, that had something different to say than what I had been brought up with.
Yeah, no, I think that's fascinating. I mean, there's a decent amount to unpack, but if you want to, should we get rolling on the video again? I could keep unpacking this, but I know there's some good stuff coming up here. So
this is true. I do want to actually, though, the mentorship concept. I do want to actually explore that a little bit more, since we're on that topic. Okay. And then maybe loop back to the video. Unless do you have anything on the mentorship part? Because I've been thinking about this. Like, this is, to me, one of the things that I think is a challenge right now. It is that element. And I do think it's tied in with this thing of play. So maybe.
No, I mean, I wouldn't mind. Yeah, we can explore a little bit, and then we can probably tie it right back in, because I do think it's bad. Because I was almost going to go down that route, but I was like, we're almost like attacking another topic. But I do see how it's going to tie back in. But this is what's really cool. So, and I think you'll appreciate this a lot. So at Inspiration Academy, right? I mean, obviously, I've already used inspire. Like, that was the root word of our, like, to inspire. But one of the biggest things, we call ourselves a mentorship model, and it's innovate, inspire, or inspire, innovate. I don't know which one comes first, and then mentor. And the whole point, we call it mentorship model. I mean, it's basically, we say it's technically a discipleship model. So if you're gonna look at the biblical term, it's discipleship, but we don't use the word discipleship just so it's a lot more understandable. But it's the same concept either way, where I'll actually have an opportunity as a coach to be a mentor over a select number of our own players, and we're going through pretty much any topic. And what's lost, I think, in society a lot is having good mentors. And I don't know if you're kind of talking about, you couldn't find many in the baseball realm, but I personally was like starving for a good older mentor. And it's something like I would intentionally pray about just finding a good mentor, like somebody just come into my life. And I never really saw that happen. And nobody, like, I always thought it'd be somebody like coming to me and wanting to mentor me. And that's where I thought society would take me. But I found a lack of that, and a huge lack of that, to the point where I started having to seek it out. And it almost became more peers, mentoring peers at a certain point, because I was more comfortable, like, bringing some of the topics up to my own peers than maybe somebody that's a little older, gone through stuff. But you hear all these stories of, like, this person was this mentor. And I know Simon Sinek, I forget his exact story, but I mean, he had an incredible mentor early in his life that changed the course of everything for him. And you hear those, and I was like, I don't have any of that. So like mentors for me became podcasts, became books, and it's like you can be mentored by that to an extent, and I think you can get a lot of good information and a lot of good wisdom. But that human connection, that relationship, that working one on one, which I'm so blessed that I'm in a school that prioritizes that, and like I can be a mentor, and I'm part of another mentorship group where I have a mentor over me. So like we're continually somebody's feeding into me, and I'm feeding into somebody else, and their job is that they're over mentors over younger people in the school. So like my post grads, a lot of them are mentors over these younger groups in our school where we have 12th graders to 6th graders. So it's a unique model, I would say, but something that I think is lost, and I think definitely needs to resurface. And I see the need more than ever to have quality mentors in your life. And like I just saw the gap in my own, and now I'm almost like on the journey. Like, one, how do I seek out a better mentor? And that's a question I've pondered myself. Like, how do I take the initiative and seek somebody out? Obviously, I'm in a model that gave me one, but without that, how do I go get one? And the other one, how can I approach somebody and intentionally work in their lives in a semi-formal way? But again, life's never that formal, I don't think. So how can you work your way into like, hey, like I'm here for you. Like we can talk about anything and stuff, things like that. I think it happens organically in coaching a little bit, but how do you be more intentional with that? Those are kind of two questions I've played with a good bit through this journey.
Yeah, and like you said, there's a lot there to unpack. I mean, the first kind of thing for me, similarly, I was looking for a mentor, and was hoping that someone would take me under their wing,
Yeah.
and kind of help me along. And yeah, that didn't seemingly ever materialize, so to speak. It did more so on the strength and conditioning side. And so, there was, at least for me, it seemed like the path was a lot clearer on the S&C side. It was, internships. Like I just heard that term very early on, and, looking into Cressy performance. And then I kind of saw that was the model, the way forward of like kind of learning underneath other people.
Yeah.
And then from that, I eventually kind of found somebody to mentor me, and I specifically asked, like, "Hey, would you mind mentoring me?" But they showed the characteristics that made me comfortable enough to even ask that, because they were interested in learning themselves. They were always continuing to grow themselves, and then they were willing to meet up and to teach me, some of the things that they were doing. And so, I mean, the one thing that I really struck me when I was at Cressy Performance was the fact that they did in-services weekly. And I find that that's not super common. And so when I think about it from the standpoint of, you have some of these really good older coaches, like how often are you having a weekly in-service where you're presenting on something and you're trying to teach your younger players something? Obviously, oftentimes how it works in coaching staffs is that you just have former players be your coaches because they already know your system. You don't have to pour into them as much. And, I think there's some value to that. But at the same point, I always wanted more structure. Yeah. And that was one of the things that I liked at being at the Division I level. Like there were more weekly meetings, and to try to get on the same page. And for me, I think that's important, because otherwise you just have a bunch of people just showing up doing their own thing, and you hope to, at some level, everybody's doing stuff in parallel, and at some level you hope that everything kind of converges and works together. And oftentimes you just have riffs, and I think that hurts the player experience. But I digress a little bit. So that was kind of my experience though, when it came to mentorships, and trying to find a mentor. And so that is something that I want to see if we could maybe potentially figure something out on that front. And that got me thinking about, like, I wonder, because when it comes to mentorship, I've heard this saying, and then I got it from Ty Lopez, and I know Ty Lopez got it from somebody else. But this idea of having, like, of your relationships, having a third being people who are older and wiser than you, that are kind of mentoring you, and then the peer-to-peer, another third being peer-to-peer mentorship. I've been finding that when it comes to baseball and skill acquisition, I end up doing a lot more peer-to-peer stuff.
Yeah.
And then you also you have like the other third of relationships where you are mentoring people who are, I guess not at your level yet, or younger and just up and coming, more novices. And so that's always kind of stuck with me. But I've always seemed to find that it's much harder to find the top third is really the more difficult one. So what I've been kind of thinking around this of like trying to help and facilitate mentorship is, in a way, I think just having a hub where people can interact, and so that there is a way for people to connect and just see who clicks with you. So I've been thinking about this in terms of Discord and trying to do something with the Discord that I have.
Yep.
I don't know if you've heard of it, Garrett. I put together this thing called the coaches. Was it the? I love how I don't have it like memorized right off the top of my head right now.
I know you're talking. I am part of it. If I would click Discord, that's the only thing I got. So I'll see if I can find it.
Oh, is it Baseball Coaches Clubhouse? Is the name of it?
That sounds right.
I'm trying to look at my just had it. Yeah, Baseball Coaches Clubhouse. So like I'm thinking about trying to, by the time we release this, right? By the time we release this, maybe we'll have something in there. The plan is to start doing something with the Baseball Coaches Clubhouse to create a place to connect people, and then also to foster mentorship, whether it's peer-to-peer or I want to say, what's a better word? Peer-to-peer, and then you have your wise mentor to mentee, you're older to younger,
Yeah,
type of a deal.
Wiser to less wise. We'll figure out a term.
Yep. But that's kind of my goal there or one of the other goals with the Baseball Coaches Clubhouse, is to provide a way for people to connect for mentorship. I've seen this Joel Credo has a big GroupMe chat, and people seem to connect or just start like serendipitous conversations in there, and that's kind of the hope of starting serendipitous conversations, and just kind of see who you naturally gravitate towards. But there's this idea too that I think might come up with what Rafe and John Vervaeke are kind of talking about here when it comes to play. And so I think this is a good segue to jump back over to the video, because when it comes to growth, I really think play is an important piece to that. And we'll kind of expand upon that here in a second.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I run up against this with trying to articulate what makes somebody a good teacher. And it's you can't replace the wise use of charisma with just the methodological application of technique. It's just not the same. Something happened to me
all right, we got to we got to cover just what he just said there. So I do want to back this up a little bit and talk. I suppose we got to talk a little bit about charisma, because I think that's one thing that we left out of those three pieces. So I think the first one that Rafe talked about was relationships, and then the second one was knowledge, and then the third piece was charisma, to kind of pull all that in. And for myself, that is something that I really feel like I struggle with, is charisma. Like, to you, how do you define charisma? What, maybe describe someone who is a very charismatic person to you.
I think on a personal level here. I know I've interacted with, trying to think of a good example of somebody. I mean, when I think of charismatic, I guess right off the rip, I would think of like you already know, like a Pete Carroll, maybe. Like, and I know players love him. He's a very charismatic coach, and I think he connects with a lot of players, and he shows. I guess you could add, like, I mean, for him, his how he kind of displays that as like extreme passion, excitement, And I know he's been known as like a player's coach, and he's very much for his players, and he like gets extreme buy-in and almost like creates like he kind of, I know Rafe kind of talked about it, kind of creates those connections because of his great charisma. But I think you can almost look on the other side if you stay in the football example, like Bill Belichick's the complete opposite. You may not like, I think in a traditional sense, at least my brain wouldn't quickly go like that's a charismatic coach, but I think he is just in a different way. And I think players talk to him in a similar light as Pete Carroll, but they look completely different. But they're both able to create those connections to encourage their players to run their certain system. Completely different how they play. But at the end of the day, they're both encouraging, creating connections, and getting their players to play in a very, very specific system in a very specific way, and they're both having extreme success doing it. So to me, it's a little more on a vague side, but I think you see it displayed in different ways. If you're kind of following what I'm saying on that.
Yeah, and when I think of charisma, I almost think of like personality. The person has a very magnetic personality, and to your point, it can manifest itself in a couple of different ways. It can be someone who is very outgoing, you could say extroverted type personality, but some introverted personalities, because it sounded like Bill Belichick, his personality sounded a little bit more introverted.
Yeah.
And that can still have a similar pull. And I guess for myself, it's trying to figure out what is that personality, for me, I've always struggled with like, okay, how can I have good charisma? I always felt like it was a form of manipulation, and in a way it is, but I had to work through that in terms of, if my goal is to help people get to where they want to go, then is it really necessarily manipulation if it's the thing that helps move things forward in terms of, I used to look at physical touch as being a way that, people would, use to manipulate you. And then I started realizing, well, people actually don't, like, you could give them all the right information, but they won't feel right about it if you don't shake on it. Like I was listening to a story of how, deals would fall through simply because somebody didn't shake the other person's hand. Yeah. And it just went to show the importance of physical touch. A handshake is not the same as like pulling somebody in close and putting your hand around their shoulder, where to me that's always felt manipulative. I was like, oh, well, if all the rest of this physical touch works the same way, and just the fact that I've always taken physical touch, even the way that I say that just sounds like it's very intimate, yeah. which in a way it is, but like that's the thing of when it comes to human connection, like we need something to anchor it to make it feel palatable. It just can't be logically correct. That's just not how we as humans operate. And so once I understood that, oh, if I want somebody to actually accept something, then I actually have to deliver it in such a way that they will actually accept it. And so having charisma, having something that may seem manipulative actually is not. It's the way, it's the form, it's the currency by which we actually connect and adopt new ways of interacting. And so that for me helped me kind of shift my mind a little bit on charisma. But I guess the other part of charisma that I think I've also struggled with is this idea of confidence, especially when, for me, I don't want to ever like lie to athletes and give them a false picture of some things. And now the way that I've rationalized it is sometimes they can't like I only got to give. Sometimes I can't over inundate you with information. But what ended up happening though before is by not trying to lie to players and give them a false sense of like, hey, if you throw weighted balls, you're going to throw harder. Just throw these as hard as you can, and just keep it as simple as that. And like this be the end all be all, or like what was for me true at one point in time was just get in the weight room, you'll get better. Like go lift weights. And it turns out the answer is way more nuanced than that. And in the effort to get kids to do things that are going to be for their best interest, sometimes we oversell the merits of a thing. And then what inadvertently happens, like, yes, you get the buy-in right now, but the danger that I've always seen is that you get the buy-in now, but then later on, they overdo it because they're running with that idea, and now they're becoming a weight room athlete, and now they're getting better at the weight room, and they're not getting any better out on the field. And so this is for me why I oftentimes felt like I came off as less confident, is because I was always trying to hedge my answers. And now I've started to see it more as, and frame it in such a way of like, okay, here's the information you need right now. And then I'll give you that other information. But I think that just kind of how my mind has worked is I'm always trying to counteract the unintended consequences. And so I've always tried to approach players in the sense of, well, if they never interacted with me ever again. So I'm trying to set you up to not need me. And then inadvertently, I over inundate you with information. Like, there's this thing of, we have to allow athletes time to process what we say. And good coaches, in the same way as good speakers, good comedians, it's all about timing, providing time for the mind to kind of catch up, for it to sit for a moment and then proceed. And that's something that I'm still working on, but now I'm much more aware of like the power of silence. And I feel like I've talked with another coach today, and he was mentioning that one of some of the other coaches, they're always saying something to their athletes. And so he feels that when they get out of the cage, like if he wanted to help them out with something, like the athlete has no more bandwidth to take any more information. And he feels like the best thing that he can do as a coach for them is not to say anything. And that just, I could tell he was struggling, just like I often do, is like, that is serving an important purpose then, but it makes you seem unimportant to the player, because now the player is always going to go look to the coach who's always giving them information. And that's something that I struggle with too right now a little bit as well, of, trying to balance that. And, I give guys more autonomy right now than I think some of our other coaches do. I'm hoping, I plan on doing more, but at the same point, I know that you can over cue a player.
Yeah.
And so that's super hard, of trying to figure out, like, how do you work that balance when you have to work together with another coach and you're both coaching the same group of athletes? How do you not over coach a player when that's super easy to do? But I digress.
Yeah, no, I feel like that alone would resonate with a lot of people, especially that are exploring the CLA, EcoD. Because I'm in the same boat. We will have technically 3 pitching minds in our academy, and I'm probably the deepest. I think our coaching staff as a whole has grown a lot and starting to understand some of these concepts. I know Rob Gray's new book has helped a lot in understanding some of these concepts. For I think now 4 coaches on staff have the book, which has been awesome to be able to kind of dig through those topics and then start trying to apply them. But I've seen that too, where I'll be like, this kid just got queued up left and right. And it's like, okay, where do I want to step in? Or I'll be working with them, and then I'll look a minute or 2 later, and then he's getting queued up with a bunch of different thoughts. And where my whole goal was to not even have the player think, we're gonna create the environment and see if I can elicit what I was looking for, elicit the change I was looking for, and then the player's thinking through it. And I feel like I'm always in the spot where, okay, well, everything I just did, I want to say is useless, but I feel like just got taken over, because that's not gonna, in my mind, it's not gonna transfer anymore. Because in a pressure situation, you don't have that affordance to be thinking through this or this or this when your intentions are completely different than standing in front of a little screen throwing a plyo ball. So that's definitely something I think anybody in this at least this exploration of these theories will struggle with. And I don't know if I've had the answer yet, and especially dealing with other coaches that maybe aren't as educated on it, or maybe don't even necessarily buy into the approach quite yet. And that's, that could be a whole nother topic of how to even approach that, and how to even go into things that we've done in the past. But that is one of the harder ones. But tying it back to to charisma, it's how do you, because I think we're both, and I could be wrong on this, but a little more reserved and introverted in some ways, especially on field. I haven't seen you coach, but I think just based on our conversation, it would be more of that. And I'm not a physical touch person by nature. Like I kind of shy. I'm that Northeast kid that physical touch is like you touched me. It's like what's going on here? Well, I know what I know.
How are you trying to manipulate me right now? What's going on?
You get super uncomfortable, and I'll like flinch away from the person instead of just like accept the fact that he's putting my hand on the shoulder and like trying. But what I noticed at times, even though I was uncomfortable with it, there's times, especially as one coach when I was younger, he would, it was a very welcoming, I guess, touch to the shoulder as he greeted you, or he's trying to teach you a concept, or you're struggling a little bit. It would almost like, it would create a connection between me and him. And it almost feel like he's with me on this journey in a lot of ways. And I think that creates that connection that I sometimes lack because I'm not willing to go and explore that physical touch a lot of times, just because like, that's how I grew up. That's what, to me, if I'm looking at an athlete and all the other options I can to help my athlete, the touching him on the shoulder and trying to create that connection is not an affordance at this point. If I were to put it in that terms, like that is not an option of mine unless I'm intentionally thinking on that. But I do think it's extremely important. I have just from our conversation and thinking through it, I remember specific times where it's like I felt connected to that coach. I felt like there was this open communication just based on him just putting his hand on my shoulder and just like showing that, hey, I'm with you, or hey, how you doing, man? Like, how's that? Things are actually going. It was very welcoming.
Yeah, and I have like two things. One to do with like the first issue that you brought up, and then one on the connection piece, because I think when it comes to, I hate when I do this. This is so like for the feel of, now I remembered it as I hate though when I want to talk, I lose it.
Yeah.
But this actually loops in well in terms of when it comes to the touch stuff, especially because that's something that I've struggled with. Like for me being reserved, and when we're talking about charisma, I think of charisma as something like you're really good at talking in front of a group.
Yeah.
And for me, I've continually recognized, because I've failed so many times at it, I'm so bad at talking in front of a group. It's because I recognize that it really helps players to have clear direction when the coach is able to speak well to the group. And generally speaking, I've always struggled with that. There might have been a time where, I wasn't so bad at it. And I think that when I think back, it was when I was coaching Junior Legion. But for the most part, especially in more recent history, I've really struggled with that. And that kind of comes back to this notion of being like good with charisma. And I kind of wonder, for someone who is more introverted, who isn't good at giving the rah-rah speeches, I think it's one of those things where I looked at it in terms of, well, I just need more practice. And so, sorry guys, this is going to be brutal for a while, but that just kind of goes to the fact that I'm much better when I'm doing one-on-one though. And the reason that I'm much better at doing one-on-one is I only have to manage one person or maybe two people's thoughts. And I can, because that's the thing that I'm much more sensitive to, is to like what other people are thinking. And like, if one person is thinking X or whatever, then I'm immediately drawn over there. And then when it's a whole group and then you get the feel of the group, then you're like, oh man, I'm now really distracted off my point just because I'm looking around and I'm seeing who isn't it connecting with. Well, I can't and so I guess that for me is being someone who does much better on a one-on-one or a small group basis. I'm able to connect with everybody in the group and kind of divert and kind of go down different paths. Whereas in a large group setting, those constraints I don't do as well with. And so I'm still trying to navigate through that and figure out what's the appropriate way to kind of bridge that. And this kind of loops back though to what we're talking about before with what do we do when we're not all on the same page, or there's just a lot of other voices speaking to the athletes. while you're trying to work with them. And what how I've approached it right now is really kind of have to die to the ego part, because like some of it's like, man, I know that what this other person is saying, there are some downside effects to this, and now they're getting too internally focused, etc. And now I think this is the biggest thing of over cueing, is that the athlete doesn't, because there's so much information being thrown at them, they don't know what to focus on.
Yeah.
This was typified to me when I was coaching at a facility one time, and a player came in from a bullpen, and he was frustrated, and I asked him just like, hey, how'd it go? And he was like, I don't even know. And I asked him, well, what were you working on? He was like, I have no idea. And that just like, it just made something click in my mind of, oh, wow. And I asked him like, well, what did you work on? He listed off like 5 different things. And it was like, okay, that's why you had no idea what you're working on. I'm like, what did you come here for? What were your goals, etc. And because the coach had him throw a bunch of fastballs. He's like, my fastball is good for my level. Like, I need to work on my slider. I didn't throw a single slider. And I was like, okay, that was kind of that conversation made it click of part of the reason why we shouldn't be over cueing guys is the fact that they just don't know what they're working on anymore after a certain point. And so what I then kind of now see my job as a coach is, especially when I'm working with a group of coaches, is once the athlete gets done, when I talk to them, I have to only give them 1 or 2 things. And I go, your next round, when it comes to hitting, your next round, I only want you to focus on this. Or, with this one athlete, I gave him 2 things. I want you to focus on hitting the ball off the top of the cage, and I want you to focus on making sure you don't stop moving. Don't come to a pause ever. For when you're making the swing, some part of your body needs to be moving the whole time. And so I left him with those 2 things, and let the other coach kind of interact with him as however he saw fit. But to me, that was a way of trying to simplify it for the hitter. Now, I probably was pushing my luck a little bit too much, given 2 things, but this would be my recommendation. Like, don't ever give a player more than 2 things to focus on at any one point in time. Yeah. And so, in an ideal world, you just give them 1. And if it's not working, like, give yourself a certain number of reps for them to try to work it out, and don't jump in the first, as soon as they mess up. Like, let them, like, if you want them to discover the answer, if we go back to the beginning of this conversation, if you want them to be able to discover the answer, you have to leave them room to be able to do that. And so sometimes you can let the athlete know beforehand, because I see this all the time with hitting, where they get in there and they're just going to take a bunch of reps. And then you feel bad jumping. At least for me, I feel bad jumping in now that they're 5 swings in and they're just rolling, to like stop them in the middle of what they're doing. So generally, if I want to do that and I know I'm going to want to change up what they're doing, I'm going to say for the next like 5 or 4 swings, I want you to focus on this, and then just stop and like, let's have a conversation before you take your next like 4 or 5 swings. And that's a good way to control the round, because like too many guys take way too many reps. But I digress again. But that on the when it comes to working with other coaches who there's a lot of voices, I see like an easy way for someone to provide value in that space is to then distill that down and clarify for that athlete, to bring it to a focal point so that they can have something very clear and tangible to focus on. And so I think that's what's going to be most helpful for athletes in that situation.
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on.
But so I think we kind of hit that charisma point really well. Yeah. I'm going to replay this point, and then we'll go through this, because this is super Eco D, even though I don't know that he's super aware of it. But I can imagine Vervaeke is, because did you watch? Vervaeke was part of that 4 Horsemen conversation with Peterson, and Peterson was talking about JJ Gibson, and Vervaeke jumped in on that anyways.
Yeah. I thought that was cool.
For you non Gibsonian people, apologies, but you're going to hear us talk a lot about Gibson, hopefully at some point.
Get in deep rapport with the student or the athlete.
I think that's also, I mean, I run up against this with trying to articulate what makes somebody a good teacher. And it's you can't replace the wise use of charisma with just the methodological application of technique. It's just not the same. Something happened to me the other night that is so convergent with what you're saying. My partner and I, we were listening to some music, and I knew she liked the Moonlight Sonata, and I played it on my phone, and then she stopped me and said, "Stop, go and look up this, and look up the Moonlight Sonata by this person." Now, she's a trained musician, I'm not. And so I go and get this other one, and I play it, and she's saying things like, notice how he's robbing a little bit of timing from this note and giving it to that note, and notice how it's deep, and she unfolds this appreciation for me, and I go, oh my gosh, this is so much better. The other was mechanical, right? It's perfect technique, but it's missing all of this, right? It's missing all of this other stuff.
A lot of times the thing.
So I think him bringing up, we can't replace charisma. And maybe correct me if I'm wrong. Is he saying we can't replace charisma with this scientific, and I'm changing the words slightly, this scientific perfect technique approach? Because I feel like that has been the approach for baseball. And that was the approach that I took as a coach was, you know what? I don't need to be manipulative when it comes to, emotional appeals and, having a ton of charisma. Instead, I can lean on technique instead and taking a scientific, data-driven approach to this. And this will make up for that fact that I lack in this other area. And essentially, Vervaeke here is saying that's not the right approach. Like, you can't, technique will not replace the skill and the art of dexterity, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm trying to think of kind of what the other side. Do you have the other side of what Vervaeke is actually arguing for? Because he's right there. He argued against perfect technique, and instead, what did he argue for?
Yeah, I think I know. I think you're kind of on the right track, at least where my brain went with it. That you can't replace charisma or creating that connection and almost like being that guide that wants to pull the athlete towards doing something with just having the perfect technique or having these perfect schemes or perfect way to go about it. Again, like I would say the same way that I started coaching, like I knew exactly how to train you. I knew all the ways that are going to make you throw faster, throw better curveballs, breaking balls, change up, whatever it may be. I knew how to do all that, but that's all I had, and I didn't know how to create the athlete. Because I think if you had just have that, you're never going to bring that athlete on the journey along with you. You have all the information, but how's the athlete absorbing that information? How's that athlete going on the journey to even find what you're looking for out of that athlete? I think that's where he's going with that. Because if you look at those three things that he talked about, like knowledge, Rafe talked about knowledge as the second one, and then the third one was charisma. And you can't put knowledge above the charisma piece. You can't just care for the athlete and have really good knowledge and not have good charisma to help actually connect those possibly two together and take that athlete or whoever it may be along in that journey and actually elicit the response or the engagement with the information that you're looking for. I think that's where my brain went with that.
And two, now that I'm thinking a little bit more on it, there's this element, what he's describing as art.
Mm-hmm.
So there's the mechanicalness of it. Like, cause I remember when I was, coming up and, playing baseball, I started going to a lot more clinics, and then everybody started talking about mechanics. And then I got really focused on doing the drills because I thought that was going to be the thing that would get me ahead, is doing all the drills, doing all the mechanics the right way. Because, what I had heard from coaches is they want players who are coachable. And so my whole focus was to do it exactly then how they talked about it. And, the funny thing is that also some coaches, but then also a lot of the other players too, are like, man, you're just like a robot. And I mean, when you think about it, if you're talking about mechanics, that's how you're viewing it. is robotically. I mean, that's where mechanics comes out of. Like if we're talking about biomechanics, whatever, and in a way, you're viewing things as machinery.
Yeah.
And so it's just interesting. But the reality is that we're live, organic, animate beings, not robots. And so in that sense, what I think Vervaeke is talking about here is that we need to make things come alive. Because what he was describing with playing the piano, like, okay, yeah, you can play it and all the technicality of it, but it has no, I guess, charisma. It has no charisma. It has no personality to it when you do it that way. But when you understand something so well that when you listen to this other artist play that same song as he was describing it, his wife, or not wife, but his significant other, talking about how this artist was taking time a little bit from one note and giving it to another to give the same piece more character and some actual life, some flow. And I think that when we're talking about what it means to coach and what it means to create an environment where ourselves and the players can be, I guess, for create an environment for our players and for ourselves to really flourish. Like we actually have to allow for this aliveness where there's a little bit give and take. Where one thing that was really interesting to me when I was doing my undergrad in college, I took this sport management class, and the tennis coach was the professor, and he was talking. We had this one lecture on, I want to say deviance, I think was what it was on, and how all sports teams are deviant to some extent. The question is, how deviant are they? And he kind of helped, at least for me, like realize like, oh, deviance is part of the game. It's a question of like, how much can you push the rules? Because the rules aren't always literally enforced.
Yeah.
And so every team and in a way, he made it seem like every good team and every good player is always trying to push the edges of the rules and the boundaries to see how the game is actually played. What are the actual boundaries? And so when I'm thinking about this analogy or this story that Vervaeke is giving on the piano playing, what the piano, this artist, this really good artist is doing is they're playing with the boundaries of the music. So let's say, just to keep it simple, the song is still the same length, but the artist borrowed a little bit of time from one note to the other to actually try to push the boundaries of what the song could be, to make it come more alive. And that is part of being alive, is playing with these boundaries and seeing what you can push and what you can get away with. And can you still get the piece to be in harmony, to sound good, to be pleasing? And when you think about it in terms of like playing the game, we're always trying to, push the boundaries, push the edge, and see what we can make of it to like find new heights to perform better. I don't know. It's very, I was trying to think of more, reaching words.
Yeah. I mean, so here, I don't know if you're going to connect. Let me know if you connect with this. But one way I almost look at it, like trying to connect it back to baseball a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So like I think back in I think it was like the first, second time I listened to this video, my brain went immediately to, you remember that tag by Javier Baez? It was, I don't remember. It was at the World Baseball Classic maybe, and it was just like, it was not perfect technique whatsoever. It was like really flashy, but I mean, it captured all of baseball, and everybody was playing it and everybody was amazed by it. And it's like he created his own flair into the game in this skillful way where it was just a tag. But if you're gonna look at perfect technique, that's not perfect technique at all. No coach is gonna teach that. But because of his abilities, he knew that was an affordance for him, and he was able to play without the technique and break out of the technique in a lot of ways. And you'll see guys like I think of Vlad Guerrero right away. I mean, that guy, at the dish. I mean, the ball was coming towards him. He has a chance to hit it, and he went outside your traditional. Like, nobody's going to coach him like that. Like, what coach is going to tell him to be swinging out pitches that are bouncing at the plate or outside the zone? And that's where you're kind of breaking out. But yeah, I mean, that's where trying to keep myself on focus here. But like the idea of these athletes can play outside of technique and create this beautiful picture of athleticism and what their capabilities are. Then I think of like is this it right here?
Not this one. But I mean, there's it was, I mean, there's tags like that. I'm looking for it because this one looked like it had the baseball classic in here somewheres. Is it at the end?
I mean, all these are like speaks exactly what I'm talking to.
Yeah, right. Boom. I mean, I think that's one of the things that's interesting in just watching it, like the no look tag.
Yeah.
I mean, why does he need to look? I mean, okay, so this is where it gets great from like a perceptual standpoint too, right? Yeah. That you don't, to use your full perception and kinesthetic awareness and feel for like where people are around you, and to have a good sense of like where things are. Like you kind of only need to, like you need to have a sense of the bag and a feel for the other person.
Yeah.
I mean, so like I'm thinking about like what information is he picking up? He's getting information out of his periphery there. Like, oh, here we go. World Baseball Classic, right?
Yeah. He's pointing.
No look.
Pointing at the catcher as he's catching and tagging. It's just like,
yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, these are the things where, yeah, it's not textbook perfect, but at the same point, that play is alive, and that's what everybody is connecting with. Like that charisma is drawing people in, and I do think, to your point, it's the passion. The passion is the stuff that I think people actually connect with. You know, I've heard a lot of people talk about really what people are looking for, players included, is authenticity, because so much of our world is, you know, people putting on a front and all that sort of thing. And it kind of goes back to this idea that I heard from Keith Davids of creating a safe environment for uncertainty.
Yeah.
Because that is most like when you're thinking about like the you know, a lot of what our world has become is very ordered, and things are safe because everything is ordered. And sometimes when things are a little bit more complex, though, there's still a level of order to that. But then when you get into the real world, where there's a lot, where the problems are a lot more ambiguous, then things become a lot more difficult to figure out, like, how should I behave? How should I go about solving this? And so if we want players to be able to thrive in that environment where there's a lot more ambiguity, which is the game of baseball, let's just be honest, because in the game of baseball, you can throw the pitch exactly where you want it to be and not get the result that you're looking for. A guy absolutely crushes it. You can be a hitter and swing and take an ugly looking swing and it be a hit. And two, if you do that enough times and get enough hits with it, like, is that really just a mistake, you're getting lucky, or is that actually skill? At what point is it luck and at what point is it skill? But point being is that the game operates in a level of ambiguity in terms of what is correct and what isn't. Because like I found this, and this is partially why I've gravitated towards an ecological approach, is I was always chasing the latest and greatest mechanical aesthetic, I guess, for lack of a better word, but like always looking for the next thing in terms of what's the new secret to hitting from a mechanical standpoint. And it's just like, man, I feel like I'm always like chasing my tail in a way, or just like chasing this other, I guess, dog around. I don't know. It maybe the better example is talking about it in terms of Ecclesiastes, and like it's just hevel. It's just a vapor. It's just like you feel like you got it, and then there's something new and better out there, and the way that we thought of doing things is now wrong. Like I guess that is probably the main thing, and this is where, from an ecological perspective, I don't have to be married to a specific thing. Not that I don't believe in biomechanics and the importance of biomechanics. I just now view it through the lens of an ecological approach. And I only go into that mechanical or biomechanical toolbox when I deem it, when the athlete really needs it, when we're looking for more power, as an example. Mm-hmm. But I digress once again.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we're only a couple minutes into this video, and
but this is my point of like why for me it was never about to be completely frank. It was never about getting through the whole video. It's more about using these videos to facilitate a conversation that otherwise sometimes will get stale, because we can always fall back on the video. To use it to spark more conversation. That's my thought.
Then they kind of go back to, I just circle back to it quick, but like that, the idea of safe uncertainty, I think that,
that was the point.
Safe uncertainty to me too is like you get to that spot that's uncertain too within training, within anything, honestly, and you'll notice like you are so much more engaged in what you're doing, and I think it can produce flow and the ability to get into a potential flow state or to be fully immersed in whatever you're doing so much, which it will increase learning and all this stuff. If you have that little bit of uncertainty, just because if you're in a safe, certain environment, you're basically doing this like rogue repetition. It's basically like rep after rep after rep, which is, I think, the difference between the EcoD and maybe like an info processing. Like rep after rep, that gets very boring. I think it increases or decreases motivation. The passion is going to be lost. A little bit of that charisma is probably going to be lost from it, but you live in that safe and certain spot where you can kind of create, and you have to solve problems and you have to explore a little bit. And I've noticed that with my own life, with my own training, with my own coaching, with coaching others. I think living within that safe uncertainty, and you don't want to like necessarily cross that outside of that safe very often. That's where sometimes it gets tricky. Making sure you're still in that safe, uncertain box, but I think that's where it lives. That's where it's alive, I would say, is probably the best word for it.
Yeah, and two, I guess where I was trying to go with that is because the game has a level of uncertainty about it, especially because the opponent, etc., creates a level of the unknown. This is why we need to train with that in mind.
Yeah.
Why we need to create a level of the players need to feel safe. So for example, for me, I understand why some coaches are really hard on their players, right? Because the game is really hard on them. So we want to prepare them for that. But if the players don't feel safe around you, then when it gets time for the game, now they have two threats that they're worried about: the team out there and the coaches in the dugout. And that's where for me, it becomes, I want to be, as a coach, the place where they feel safe and I've got their back. And then that frees them up, like you were talking about, that keeps them engaged.
Yeah.
It frees them up to actually engage more with the problem out there, to band together that, hey, we're all in this together. There's this big daunting threat out there, which is the game. I mean, let's just be honest, right? The pitch is coming at now 105, right?
Yeah.
If you're facing Aaron Hicks, now obviously, in the college setting or whatever in high school, you're probably not facing 105, but to face 90 plus, I mean, that is a very daunting task for any amateur athlete. And so to me, we have to create an environment where they feel like that the threat isn't also in the dugout, because the threat is definitely out there. There's a huge challenge that they face out on that field. And if they don't feel supported and safe, then they're always going to be operating under threat mode. And that just doesn't allow for the best to come out of players, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So that's where I was going with that.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, it comes down to like almost encouraging failure in a lot of ways, or having a safe space to fail and explore, because you're never gonna get that exploration out of your players. You're never gonna get that willingness to thrive. Maybe try things if they're not willing to fail, and then that easily ties into the game. If you've already encouraged failure, and like you've that failure is something that we're going to be about. We're going to be about failing, learn from it, and be able to encourage that. You come to a game, failing's not as bad, I think.
I think too, though, the way that I would phrase it, because I'm with other coaches that might push back and be like, what's this failure thing? Like, we don't want to encourage failure. And so rather, the way that I would frame it is that don't be afraid to fail in seeking greatness.
Yeah.
Like, I want you to attempt to try to do something that's slightly beyond your ability. Like, discover an affordance, discover something that you think is possible and just beyond your reach or your grasp. And it's safe to try for something great and to fall short. And to me as a coach, my job then is to, after you make that effort, I'm going to encourage you, try again. And then when you make it, I'm going to celebrate. Because here's the thing too, sometimes you're going to try on the first time for something that you have never done before, and you're going to achieve it, and we're all going to celebrate with you. And so for me, when we're talking about this failure thing, I think too many people have, and I understand too, it took me a while to come to this conclusion, but too many people have made it sound like failure is okay. And I don't, and for the really competitive, that doesn't make any sense. But if you're really competitive and you want to succeed, you have to understand that in order to succeed, you're going to fail along the way towards that success. And that failure comes from you trying to succeed, and just understanding that is that process of you trying to do something that you've never done before and to reach your full potential. And so that for me is why I think we should frame it that way, and frame it as this is the road to success. And this is because it hinges on this whole idea and this notion of safe uncertainty, because what is uncertain is your success.
Yeah.
And so we want to create a safe environment for you to succeed.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot, because I think my brain immediately goes to, because I'm more in that where other people aren't, maybe in the eco-D straight line approach, where you look at like a skateboarder, and they just try, and they fail, 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 and then they finally hit it. And it's like the greatest hit. But it was that learning process and being willing to just absolutely eat it and fall over and over and over that gets them to the more skillful attributes of skateboarding. So I guess that's where my brain automatically goes to, and like having environments that encourages that, and you're willing to try something, and you're willing to get outside of what you originally thought was an affordance per se, and be able to play on the edges. I kind of like that term, like be able to play on the edges a little bit of your own skill. But it is a good point.
Well, and it goes to this topic of what this video is, and the whole point of playing is when you're playing with something, you are manipulating it. You are trying something slightly different and seeing what happens.
Yeah.
And so to make a little note here, part of the reason that we keep pausing it is so that I don't think Rafe will have it necessarily hit us with a copyright or anything, but just for YouTube or whatever, when we put it up, it works better if we take more pauses and comment. And so I'm looking at this going, we're about halfway through. And so I'm going to play this forward a little bit, but this goes through this idea though, of like what you're talking about. Like, this is why we use this term play. Like, this is how we learn. This is how we grew up. We all played when we were kids, and that's just how we learn about the world. And so in order for us to, in my mind, unleash our full potential, to unleash the full potential of our athletes, is we need to recapture, and I want to say recapture and revitalize. Basically, we need to re-inspire our players to play, and to play in practice, because practice is oftentimes where players check out. I mean, you can remember this this very memorable, famous football clip where I don't know which football player it was, but are we talking about practice?
Yeah.
Are we talking about the game? And I'm pretty sure it was in the context of like, why aren't you trying very hard in practice? Like, why are you not taking it seriously? And this is just the notion because practice is boring. Like that's what I think that player was saying is like, I'm not getting better here. And what matters the most is how I do on the field. So why are we talking about practice? And so if we want to re-engage players in practice, we need to re-engage them with play. So anyways, do you have any other thoughts on that, or do we want to try to pull a few more or hammer the point home with the video?
Yeah, we can inch forward a little bit of this. I know they're about to go into play a little bit, so probably an appropriate time.
Sweet.
Thing that helps you solve complex problems is actually play.
Yes, serious play.
We'll back that up a second.
All of this, right? It's missing all of this other stuff.
A lot of times the thing that helps you solve complex problems is actually play.
Yes, serious play.
As a martial artist, right? You could train techniques every day, all day, and you could have a bigger set of techniques than anybody else. But it's the feel for how to create solutions in vivo with another person that allows you to have success. And that's
so one of the things that I wanted to start with is play helps us solve complex problems. And what is more, at least to me, a complex problem than trying to hit a baseball that's thrown and moving? But you can flip that since you're a pitching coach. What is more complex than trying to throw a pitch and deceive a hitter and to hit your spot, or trying to get a hitter out? I mean, both of those are equally difficult.
Yeah, 100%. And that's where I don't think a lot of people go into the training, or they go into a cage, or they go into a bullpen and think they're playing at all at this point. I really think that's lost. And it's kind of funny that they use, and we can get into their term, a point here, but serious play I think is a gold term, and it's kind of funny. So just give you a little story on this. So I know we talked about it a little bit, but I'm gonna bring up my brother a little bit since he's a pitcher at Division I school right now, and over COVID we had a lot of time to just reconnect and just kind of literally play around with stuff. Is the definition of it, and we basically ran to this guy Edu Portel and just looked at some of his movement stuff, and he was fascinated by it, so we just played around with it. And one thing he started doing in his catch play is just kind of running around, doing different variations and trying to throw the ball in a bunch of different ways, but still hit his spot every single time. And he saw this thing on Twitter talking about this coach talking about how serious you should be taking every throw, taking time in between every throw, trying to hit your spot, working through things every single time. And my brother goes, I don't think that's right. I think you should approach it in more serious play, where we're still trying to hit our spot, but you're exploring, you're trying different things. And he actually used the word serious play. I had not heard it before that, and I don't know if he stole it from somebody, but he used that. And then when Rafe and John used serious play, I was like, that already connected with me a lot, because I think it is. It's not just like this term of pure enjoyment and we don't really care what happens and we're just kind of joking around like kids do. But we're going to solve complex problems, but we're going to explore, we're going to allow different variations, we're going to work outside of techniques, and we're going to have fun while we're doing it in a way. But fun's not necessarily the goal at the end of the day. But yeah, I thought serious play connected with me a lot, since I heard it used before, not in that exact context, but I think it's a gold term. I think that's it.
No, absolutely. And it just, as you were talking, it made me think of something Bruce Lee was saying. But there's this other comment that kind of came up. I was listening to actually the Joe Rogan podcast recently, but this doctor was on there talking about something that should probably is too controversial to discuss on here. But anyways, what he did say though that struck me, and I know I've heard other people talk about this, is that when multiple people come to the same conclusion that haven't necessarily been talking to each other, but have been working on kind of the same problem, you're onto something, or you're onto like the right thing. And so regardless of whether or not he heard it from, the same person or somebody else, like it's the fact that when you're engaged in this type of thinking, you kind of come to the same conclusions.
Yeah.
I've seen the same thing happen in the S&C side of things. Like some of the things that I've been looking into back in 2014 or 2015 or whatever into 2016, like now people are actually doing those things. Like when it comes to looking at javelin, when it comes to developing pitchers and increasing velocity, utilizing kettlebells for hitters, doing isometrics, overcoming isometrics to increase or basically potentiate a hitter to be able to swing the bat faster. Like these are things that I'm seeing people now do, and I hadn't seen anybody doing it when I'd first come across these things. Very few people were talking about it, and I just knew as a matter of time before people were going to get there. I still don't think it's as big as it should be, but that's neither here nor there. I did want to play this one clip from Bruce Lee, and I'm going to go back and edit this in post to just get to the point where he talks about when he's starting to talk about like a good fight. And so I'm gonna play this and then to kind of hammer this point home a little bit more. By the way, if you haven't seen Bruce Lee's stuff, you should go watch like all the clips that Bruce Lee is in. So if you go watch his movies expecting it to be great acting, you're going to be sorely disappointed. Only the scenes that Bruce Lee is in have good acting in them. So, if you're feeling really bored, just I warned you ahead of time. Just skip to all the parts that he's in.
Teacher?
I see your talents have gone beyond the mere physical level. Your skills are now at the point of spiritual insight. I have several questions. What is the highest technique you hope to achieve?
To have no technique.
Very good.
All right. For copyright reasons, we're just gonna comment on this because one, that's fantastic right there. I mean, okay, so just this whole thing of like the convergence divergence thing of the fact that you have different people saying basically the same thing. I mean, Vervaeke, I'm almost positive Rafe is very familiar with Bruce Lee, and I wouldn't be surprised if Vervaeke is as well. But that didn't come up in their conversation. But that is basically what Rafe was there talking about there at that when we paused that previous video. Yeah. And two, what Vervaeke was touching on is that you can have all these techniques, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to, when you're actually dealing with a complex, unknown problem, that you're actually going to be able to deploy that technique to solve your problem. And so essentially here, what Bruce is saying is that the highest technique is to have no technique. And he's going to kind of elaborate on that more. But I think coaches should kind of sit with that for a little bit to try to understand, like, what is he saying? I was listening to this book on perception and the difference. It was also talking about the difference between East and West. Like the West has more of an analytical mindset and everything following from logic. So very, very much from the Greeks and, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, everything kind of follows this very linear logical pattern. And so with that, you have things that always follow from a premise. So you can't have two contradictory things. And so what Bruce just said there is very Eastern, where they very much will say something that seems kind of contradictory. What's the highest form of technique is to have no technique. Well, that doesn't make sense. Like, how do you have the best technique equaling no technique? Like, these things don't logically follow from one from another. And so there is a larger truth, I think, to ponder. It's designed to make you think. So I'm going to throw that out there before we proceed here.
What are your thoughts when facing an opponent?
There is no opponent.
And why is that?
because the word I does not exist.
Out of everything that Bruce says there, this is the only thing that I have zero idea what the heck he means by that. So do you have any ideas of what he might be saying there?
No, I mean, it's something maybe I'll revisit and try to think through a little more, but off the rip, no.
I mean, we could go on and on about, the highest form of technique is to have no technique. I wrote a blog post on it for Emergence. So if anybody wants my thoughts on that, they can go check that out. But I'll tell you all, I got nothing on this one. So,
So, continue.
A good fight should be like a small play, but played seriously.
boom. Like that's what I was thinking of when you're talking about serious play.
Yeah.
Like, and what did he say there? I'm going to play
like
it.
a small play. A good fight should be like a small play, but
Yeah, so a good fight should be like a small play. And that's interesting in the sense that there's something else that Bruce has talked about that I very much have incorporated into my hitting philosophy, is this notion of we need to have emotional content. And when I think about a play, when you think about a play, it's very dramatic.
Mm-hmm.
Like and so within it, there is emotional content. And so there's a level of what he is saying, both in the sense of what we've been talking about, that we need to play with things, but also within that, there should be emotion. There's some level of emotion, some level of aliveness, some level of personality. I think that might be something better for players to connect with, is that when you're playing, you should have some level of personality involved. But yet at the same time, you're taking it seriously. You're not just playing around to goof around.
Yeah.
You're playing around to discover more about the world that you inhabit in a way, but more specifically, you're trying to discover more about yourself within this environment, within this context. And how do you relate to the problem, so to speak? And this kind of leads me to this other little rant that I have of, by seeing things through an ecological approach, I've begun to appreciate more about relationships. And that's the difference between, I guess, this perception book was talking about East and West. In Eastern cultures, they think very much more about like how things relate to one another. So if you were to give a list of like glove, hand, scarf, Westerners would oftentimes pair scarf and glove together. And people from Eastern cultures would pair glove and hand together, because they're looking more at the relationship between the two things. Like, so the glove covers the hand, type of a thing. And so an ecological approach kind of takes a similar view of like, it's very much looking at like, how do we relate to other things? And so, I mean, what did we talk about at the very beginning of this conversation? Like building relationships. How do we relate to one another? And so I think when it comes to play, part of what we're doing when we are playing is figuring out how we relate to one another or to other things around us and to the world around us.
Yeah, no, I was even pondering that. I mean, we just some of the staff, it was as simple as we just went out and played a little spike ball, and I think that game in itself, the interactions, the learning, the fact that you have to learn your partners, you have to basically without even talking, you're interacting with each other's own affordances. You have to learn their affordances as you're working on your own. Because I'm personally not that great at like hitting the ball into the net. Like that's probably why I'm not like a slouch. Like I played the game before, but like that's not my strong suit. If I'm away from the net, I'm gonna struggle with that. But I know my partner is a lot better at that, and I'm just like working alongside him and like learning him through the game in a way, and learning his capabilities, and like just through play, you learn all about like his own movements, his capabilities. You actually like can pick up a little bit about personality. I think Rafe talks about that in his Driven by Play TED Talk a little bit. So like as you play, you learn a little bit about yourself, where you should try to go in life, and you're almost like figuring out what path you should go down, and you're learning about yourself. And are you a risk taker? Are you not a risk taker? And like just through play, it's going to expose those things. And are you going to be good with organizing things? Are you going to be good with just going out and trying to possibly like create something? Are you going to be good with relationships? Are you going to be good with whatever it may be? But just through play gives you a really, really strong insight and look at that. So that was fascinating. I was just kind of like, we were just playing spike ball. I mean, maybe these things shouldn't be going through my head. We're just playing a game. But like these are the things like I'm pondering as I'm like interacting with him, and we're like learning each other, and we're figuring out how to best perform the task at hand. But we're communicating in a way that's a non-verbal communication as we're picking up each other's affordances. And I don't know, it's fascinating if you really kind of look at it at that point of view, I guess.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and like this just kind of plays into this notion of embodied cognition.
Yeah.
How our movements help us make connections with other things. And so that's where like activity and movement and lifelong movement and play is so beneficial for our growth. I mean, because if it was, it's kind of one of those things in strength and conditioning, there's this big obsession about making the case for these primal movements that everybody has. And this is like, look, a baby, has really good rib cage, the ribs are down and they don't have anterior pelvic tilt, which makes no sense to me or whatever, because my kid has massive anterior pelvic tilt and has had it since he's been upright walking around. And like, this is the thing of like, but everybody was couching their arguments, and like our system is designed around like how children develop. But one of the hallmarks of how children develop is play.
Yeah.
And so if we've been going back to try to do physical development and training around, or rehab around how children theoretically develop in like crawl and roll and whatever, then we actually need to also look at how they actually acquired all their other skills. And that's how we acquire skills. And we need to get back to that. And serious play is that form. Yeah. I'm gonna let's roll this forward. Let's see if where they land the plane here.
That's fundamentally the same thing in some sense as being a teacher, as being a coach, because play is repetition with variation, right?
Yes. The verb, I do Tai Chi Chuan, right? And the verb, you don't do Tai Chi. The Chinese verb is you play it, like when you play music, right? You're a Tai Chi player. And it's the same sort of thing. Serious play is the way we go through these very difficult transformative experiences. Therapy is a kind of serious play. Martial arts, when done properly, are serious play. That's what we're saying. I think another disservice our culture has given us is we've lost the category serious play. Play has been assimilated to leisure and to fun, where right, and some play is entertaining, and I'm not saying we dispense with that, but we shouldn't reduce all play to entertaining play. Some play is the serious play that engages fundamental transformative processes for us.
Actually, that was a good place to stop. Like, play facilitates like transformation. One of the other things too that I took out of there, like Rafe talked about playing has a level of variation, or play with variation in it. And this is that rep without rep approach. And I just think back to like when you create a game, when it starts out, all you're doing is something like, I remember being over at my neighbor's, and in her garage, they had like these golf balls, for the car or whatever. And they're just kind of hanging there. And we just kind of sat there. And I think maybe at first we just started swatting them back and forth. And then it was like, wait, I got some like paddles, like ping pong paddles or whatever. They're just sitting over here. And so we pick them up and we're just like kind of smacking them back and forth. And eventually the ball like ends up wrapped around because it was hanging off of a shelving unit. And so it ends up wrapped around the post that it's attached to. We're like, oh, cool, that's a point or whatever. And now this turned into this game.
Mm-hmm.
Like it starts out with something super mundane that you're just like, I don't know, there's this thing here and I'm just kind of goofing around with it. And then it morphs into something else. And I think that's so much, that goes back to what Vervaeke was talking about there at the end of how play ends up being transformative. Was that Vervaeke or was that Rafe?
I think that's
I think it was
at the end.
Vervaeke.
Yeah,
Yeah. And so, like, to me, this is just the perfect example of like how things transform over time into this game, and then through games we can actually learn more about ourselves. Yeah, I want to throw this over to you before I keep going and see what else that you picked out of that little bit there.
Yeah, no, I think when I heard repetition with variation, I mean, I was like, I never heard necessarily coined that way, but I mean, that's rep without rep in the spot on. I mean, that is play in a nutshell. And that's what I guess, to bring it back to the baseball side, is like, that's what we try to encourage our guys to do a lot of, is like in our catch play, let's have repetition with variation, play around with this. And my players actually get annoyed, and this may be me not communicating as well, but like, I'll give them a concept. And I was like, all right, just play around with this. And those are the verbatim words I use a lot. And like, I even heard one of my players like pretending to coach me up is like, hey, Coach Baker, why don't you try this? And I just play around with this a little bit. And I thought that was hilarious. And I'm like, okay, maybe I'm not cueing it perfectly, or maybe I'm not communicating perfectly, since there's times that I heard him talking like, oh, it's just so frustrating. It just tells me to play around with this. But I think it goes into twofold, where like they want just the answer, and they've lost serious play. They've lost the ability to explore in a lot of ways, since the system itself has been more just like, we're spewing out answers, we're looking for answers, and we're just spewing them out versus like exploring. But it could be a little bit on me too, like how I'm encouraging the play versus just saying, hey, go play around with this. But how am I creating that environment to actually allow them to explore? Is it a rich environment to go explore? Does it inspire them to go explore? Is another thing that I've been kind of thinking a lot on. How do I do that better? Because I think serious play is it. In my own life, I noticed like my own training, like when I engage in serious play, I train a heck of a lot more, and I train a lot harder when I allow myself to engage in it. When I'm looking for, maybe even like I'm looking for information on ecological dynamics or constraint-led approach, and I engage myself in serious play with how I think through the ideas and work through some of the ideas. It's almost like a serious play as I work through the information in a way. And when I do that versus I'm just looking for the answer and just regurgitating it onto a piece of paper, that allows me to learn it and interact with it and make it come more alive. So I think just that alone, that serious play and like being able to like the repetition with variation, I think is spot on. And I've been pondering that a lot in my own coaching and just even like my own life. Like how do I engage this a lot more?
Yeah, it just makes me want to go back to, I was looking up the whole thing on like, we need, in order for us to understand something, we actually need to have a role in creating it.
Yes.
And so like, there's this notion that we have to self-generate things in order to learn more about them, to actually have this embodied experience of the thing. And there's this notion, and maybe we've talked about this before, the idea of knowledge of something versus knowledge about something. And so I feel like I had another point on that, but like there's that to me is kind of when you're talking about like this idea, like I was thinking about this too, when you said that they kind of were making fun of you about it. And I also think that that's when things start to kind of click for guys, is when it becomes memeable.
Yeah.
Because that's basically what it is. And you're like, okay, now it's starting to stick a little bit.
Yeah.
And you might not fully understand it yet, but now it's enough of a meme that like, okay, this is a theme of like how we're going to begin to interact with this. And so I guess where I'd go from there is maybe trying to pull back the curtain a little bit in terms of, okay, what is play? What am I asking you to do? When I say play, this is what I mean by it. And if you don't understand it, like let's dialogue about it. Like, and it is to your point of the fact that guys so much want the answer. And I was thinking about this in terms of, I've been working with somebody with martial arts, and we're trying to take an ecological approach, but yet at the same time, he's struggling with things because he's like, he says that there are certain things you're not going to find on your own. And I think that's also what the player is alluding to is when I play around with this stuff, like I hit a wall. I like there's whatever the answer is that you're talking about. I'm not able to find it. And so, but the thing is like you do inadvertently find things when you start playing with other people because they have a different perspective. They have a different life experience, etc. And so through that, they are going to discover things that you're not going to discover. And when they discover that, and if you're able to see it and or if they share it, then you have a new way of trying to interact with that thing that you're playing with and a new intention and all that sort of stuff. And so for me, that's how I approach of that. It's like you're going to try to get, explore, play around and get as far with it as you can. And then I'll interject. I'll drop a little nugget in there for you to now play. Now you have something new to play with. It's in a way you could, whether it's an idea or whatever, it's kind of like this new toy. All right, I'm dropping a new toy into the environment. And now you have another way that you can interact with this problem that you're trying to solve or this landscape that you're trying to interact with. And so that's in a way, I guess when I would talk to them in terms of like, all right, think about play. What is play? What are you doing when you play? And if you're not fully aware, then it's like, because I also think like you do have to explain this idea of like, okay, when you played, how often did you ever do pretend? And when you pretended to be something or whatever, like what were you mimicking? And by mimicking, like, because here's this notion of embodiment. We don't understand a thing until we interact with it.
Yeah.
And so what do kids do? They mimic other things that they see. And so, for example, one day my kid, he's sitting at the dinner table and he's just going, no. And he's got the finger in there too. And I'm like, what is he doing? Oh my gosh, he's mocking me. And then I'm like, but if it weren't for an ecological approach, I would have probably been really offended because I'm like, dang it. My disciplining of my child has not worked. Instead, he is just mocking me, which I guess is fair because I mock him all the time too, sometimes when he's throwing a fit. So I guess it's only fitting. But from an ecological approach, what I then understood was like, oh, wait, this is actually a good thing because now he can understand more when I'm doing this, what I mean. And like now he can feel like, oh, dad is mad.
Yeah.
And by doing this, like there's more energy and weight behind it. So this is, to me, this notion of playing. And when we play, when we mimic other things, we actually get a deeper understanding of that thing. And this is the weird thing too. Like, have you ever tried dancing and, you're just not getting it? And then when you're just like, you know what? You come back later and somebody else is dancing and, because you sucked at it, you're like, all right, I'm going to mock you. And then when you go to mock them, you do it, you execute it like almost perfectly. And it's kind of like, what the heck? When I get into this mocking mode, I free myself, I loosen myself up to mimic the other person. And then I'm actually able to do the thing. I find that to be, I don't know if anybody else has had that experience, but I've noticed whenever I try to make fun of something, whether it's a voice or whatever, you actually hit it pretty well. And this is this idea of acting.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting, this notion of play and how we actually begin to have knowledge of and better understand a thing by actually playing, which is weird because like Vervaeke is talking about is we've come to believe that play is just this entertainment, some leisurely activity that we do that has no seriousness, no actual application. That's what kids do. Real serious professionals don't play.
Yeah.
And it's just this bizarre thing where like the world is getting turned upside down and the things that we thought were the way to lead us to the most success were actually the things that we started with.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I think Rafe talks about it again, back into that TED talk. He's like, play will increase your ability to continue through something. And it's not just discipline. Yeah, discipline is really important, but play will increase motivation and will continue to allow you to actually continue to strive for whatever you're going for if you have a play aspect of it. And I think that's so important. I look at like baseball players, like, I mean, you go to a college setting, you're working every single day. And then you go, especially like you look at like you're up north, I was just up north. and we're inside for 4 or 5 weeks straight. And if you're not interacting with play, like motivation, and you're talking leading up the season, motivation can crash quickly if it's just rep after rep after rep, and you're just like stuck inside this gymnasium. It looks nothing like the game. It feels nothing like the game. You compete maybe with like some live settings, but not really. That's your only play you really get. Other than that, it's like ground, like for us, it was ground balls off a gym floor, like fly balls in a very confined space. Maybe we go outside, but you're not gonna have much fun since you're freezing trying to do it in the parking lot or a little bit of turf that's blown off. And if we can't create environments where there's play within that and you're exploring things, the motivation is going to crash, in my opinion. And you're not going to continue to have players engaged throughout your practices. And how, I guess that's a big question. Like, how do you intertwine that with everything? And how do you even start that? Like we might have talked about this, like even from you start in the warm up, like how do you start exploration from the warm up? How do you create player autonomy in the warm up to start that right from the get go? Because if it's in the warm up, it's going to be real easy to intertwine everything for players to explore. At least it's going to be easier. Say. Not going to be that much easier, but it's definitely going to open up some pathways where they're going to be able to play around with other stuff because you start it right off the get go, and that's going to increase motivation, increase engagement, increase everything you're trying to do. And I guess that may even come back to what we're talking about, like that player-coach relationship a little bit. You're going to have an actual interaction that's not just me telling you what to do and how to do it. It's just me guiding you within this landscape that you get to now explore. And that's where, to go back to my brother when he talked about serious play, like he went back to a school and he lost it. It was no longer serious play. It's like, I feel like I'm back at a job and I'm not doing as well anymore. Like he was tearing it up when he was engaging in serious play, was having a lot of, I guess, fun, but that led to a ton of motivation to just go out and just move and try things and throw in different ways. And it led him to exactly what he was missing. And then he went back to school and it became a lot more strict and rigid, and motivation just went down. I could even talking to him, he wasn't talking about baseball the same way anymore. So I think that's almost like a caution for coaches in a lot of ways. Like how can you increase exploration and serious play and fun? And it could be as simple as warm-ups, catch play. How do you increase that in catch play? And I think that's in cage work. Like how do you do it in cage work when maybe you're just doing the first round? But I mean, there's so many ways to do it. It's just how do you continue to intertwine it? And that's what I think everybody should kind of ponder and really think on, since there's so many benefits for it.
Yeah, and too, the way that I was thinking about introducing it was you start with play.
Yeah.
And then you then take that and you go back to whatever the actual thing is that you need to execute on. And I think too, I think the better way to kind of approach this is to go back to this idea of seriousness. So, because what we're talking about is serious play. So this has been my experience. So I did choir in high school, and then I tried out for a scholarship for choir and theater. And so because they're basically the same scholarship, I got the theater one, and so they weren't going to give me the music one. But I went to choir showed up for the choir practice for like maybe a few days, and it was just so weird how much goofing around there was, because the choir that I was in high school was decently good, and we'd actually done some of the same songs. And I just remember like some of the things that, my choir teacher in high school, said like, hey, this is like very immature, was like happening at the collegiate level. I'm like, if you guys aren't going to take this seriously, like I'm out of here. And so that's why I didn't stick around for that, because I just wasn't going to miss school and baseball and all this sort of stuff for a group that didn't take pride in what they did. And so when we're talking about serious play, it's taking what you're doing seriously, but you're exploring, you're having fun with it. There's a way to, I think that's the thing that we need to, because what I see right now is like seriousness and rigid.
Yeah.
And then play and like everything's free reign and goofing around and completely unstructured. And you have these two extremes.
Yeah.
And what we're advocating for is that middle ground of seriousness with play that is purposeful. I think that might be another way of talking about this, is purposeful play. is different than entertainment, for just pure enjoyment, goofing around. And that's what I think I kind of wanted to talk about. So when we do serious play and you implement that within practice, what you are then doing is like, okay, now we're exploring, we're playing around. And then when we come back to our typical ordinary drill type of a thing, even though I don't like the word drill, but let's say we come back to our traditional practice activity. For example, if we're for an outfielder, we're goofing around with all the different ways that we can play, catch a ball off the wall, etc., whatever. And then we go back to our standard, fly ball or field a ground ball and throw to a target. Like, cause maybe before you're just kind of like flipping around and seeing how many different ways could I throw it in. And then now, okay, we're going to do all the standard stuff and you're going to try to figure out how many times we can still make a game out of it. How many times can you hit the guy in the chest? With even the basic stuff, and just see how many times you can do that and see if like your performance in that setting improves even after playing around. Maybe the first couple ones, because you're trying to recalibrate, maybe are not as accurate. Maybe you have a warm-up phase like in driveline, right? You don't, when you're going to chuck the ball as hard as you can, you don't start with the first one and cut it loose at 100%. You go at 80 or whatever. And so this idea and notion of recalibrating and then taking a very traditional round and then seeing if your numbers improve over time or your performance improves over time. Because the whole idea of play and variability within your practice setting is to actually improve the consistency of your outcomes or the consistency of your performance.
Yeah, no, I think that's fine. Have you heard the story of I forget who it is, but there's a shot putter, like one of the best shot putters at the time. He was one of the best in the world, and he essentially like just intentionally played with every variant of a shot put throw he could possibly do, and that became all his training, was just these very weird ways to throw a shot put, and just varied it almost every single rep. And like you look at some of the videos, there's weird pauses. He's out on his front foot on some of them. He's like stopping in the middle and then continuing. He's doing like these weird twirls, but that's how he trained, and that's all he did. He literally, I mean, I've defined it as serious play, but he always had the goal of throwing as far as he could off of these different variations. And I forget the exact results, but he improved, and he was already one of the best. Like just him doing that versus what he typically was doing, and I believe he was stagnant. I want to quote me on that, but I think he was stagnant to that point, and then he went with complete variability, and his throw actually increased. Where the typical person say, "There's no shot at that." Like not training your technical model wouldn't produce the best within his best technical model. But what he did is he varied it up like crazy, played around, and did all these weird, funky stuff, and that led him to his best result yet, which I think is really cool to hear, because I think when you're thinking about distance, you're thinking technical model, because he's not necessarily hitting a target per se. He's just trying to throw it as far as he can, and that actually improved it, which I think more people can get on board with, like throwing in different ways to hit a target is going to increase accuracy. I think more people get behind that, but not as many people get behind, and I was one that struggled with it, like not as many people get behind, like maybe you're going to be able to throw harder by adding more variation to it and not chasing the technical model anymore. I think was really fascinating to kind of learn about.
Yeah, I mean, and part of the reason too is coaches for a long time have talked about, like, if you can repeat your mechanics, then that's what's going to allow you to throw with greater consistency or with greater accuracy. And so that's why I think for a lot of coaches, it's really hard for them to switch, because that's the mantra, the common sense, or the conventional wisdom was repeatable mechanics lead to a repeatable result. And we're finding that that's when you actually look at and you do a full signal analysis. Now, I even talked to Anthony Brady at ACBA a few years ago about this, and he's like, for example, the Japanese players, their margin of error is a lot smaller, but the Dominicans, they have a greater variability. And by margin of error, I mean like the standard deviation or the range at which their mechanics was a lot smaller with the Japanese players than the Dominican players, as an example, as a comparison. But what I got out of Anthony was that there was still variation within the Japanese players, and Driveline, and I believe Kyle has talked about this. Like, it's a very small window that you're playing around with, and he used that as evidence for the fact that there is basically no variation, and that you need to repeat your mechanics. I don't think I don't know if he still believes that, but that was the way that he was arguing it.
Yeah,
because that is through the conventional lens that he was viewing it. But from an ecological perspective, that's evidence for variance.
Yeah.
Like, look, it's not completely repeatable, but there is this window, and we need to be really good at being able to get to that window from all these different positions. And so that's at least how I view it from an ecological perspective. So to kind of land the plane, do we want to finish this video up and wrap it up there, or do you want to land the plane somewhere in here?
I'm trying to remember what the rest of the video. I think it just continues a little more on the serious play side. So, I mean, I'm good either way. But I think
a natural way to end it would be to
just play it out.
Yeah, why not?
Recognize within parkour that it is, and these other practices that have come to build, evolve, move, play, that they're a way to engage in a serious practice of self-transformation. You're going to find some novel challenge that you're going to test yourself against, and then you're going to play with it by adding variations, by moving things around, by exploring it in new ways.
Yeah.
In this world that we exist in, that has become so ordered in certain ways, we need something that allows us to do that, to reimagine play and to bring play into our life and to engage with it in a serious way.
So I'm gonna, do you have any extra comments before I kind of land the plane on one thought, or try to loop it back into something we talked about before?
No, I think that pretty much sums up what we're already kind of, the tree we're kind of barking on already. I think that sums it up fairly well. And you got a nice little plug of his company in there, so if anyone wants to check him out, Evolve, Move, Play. So give him some
absolutely. Well, that was going to be part of my me landing the plane. So going back to what I talked about before about mentorship and why I think that's super important, and what I've kind of been looking for. And I know I've talked to you about this idea. So I got a chance to go to actually one of Rafe's retreats. And so when I was at that retreat, Rafe was kind of talking about this idea of play, and part of this, in order for us to grow, we need others to play with. And so when it comes to working through different ideas and concepts, especially as coaches, right? We need other people to play with, to play with ideas, to see what can we do with this thought that we have, or these ideas and concepts. And so this kind of loops back to this whole notion of like, why trying to put together some form of a baseball coach's mentorship. And I don't want to call it a program. I really, because I'm not like, there's the general form of like, all right, this is a mentorship program that I'm putting on, and then you all come to me and I mentor you. But rather, my thought is I want to connect other people who are looking for mentors and to be mentored, or who want to mentor other people, and just create a hub where people can connect, interact, and in some ways serendipitously, or maybe we can facilitate more in a more serious way of like, hey, I am, put like what year you are and like what type of, like, I don't know, like do kind of like, some way of like speed connecting, speed dating type of a thing where people like get to interact with one another, see if like, okay, I'm looking for a mentor or whatever, and just try to find ways to partner. But I mean, it could be as simple as just facilitating discussions and just seeing what shakes out from there. So that's kind of my idea of, we need other people in order to fully grow, to kind of play with somebody who will enter in and play with the ideas and have a conversation with you. And the hope is that they do it in good faith, and they're, you can still play with somebody else who is coming in with negative intentions. And you can still grow from that, but that doesn't create that safe uncertainty, because again, if you want to have to go for why you need that safe environment is because what's uncertain is the ideas of what it looks like for them to play out and how all this stuff works. The uncertain is, how are we going to coach our athletes better? How am I going to deal with this coaching problem that I have? And so this in a way too fits well with what this podcast is about. The Confessions of a Baseball Coach. Like, these are the struggles that I think that we are going through is finding other people to connect with. I mean, given the way that the world is now and how much stuff is online and all this sort of stuff and the different ways that we have become increasingly isolated from one another, I think as great as technology is, Garrett, for us to be able to, me be in Minnesota and you be in Florida and to do this is great, but there's still sometimes we are not able to find what we need where we currently are. And so the hope is to somewhat facilitate that. I still think, honestly, in person is the best. And part of the reason in person is the best is because David Snowden talks about this. We only can explain and articulate about 10%, maybe. I mean, and I have no idea how you come up with this number, but we can only articulate only a small portion of what we know. And the rest of it is contextual to the things that we go through on our day to day. And sometimes too, some of the stuff we know, like we don't even know we know because we just live it and we do it. And it isn't unless we, live and do life with other people that we actually pick up on the other lessons that people have to teach us. And so, at the end of the day, it's, what I would say and encourage, people that you end up finding as mentors, even if you are at distance from one another, do take some time and work something out such that you can go spend, a few days, a week, with that other coach and just be a fly on the wall, observe, participate in what they're doing. I've heard other coaches talk about this and, for whatever we think about clinics, like in the summer camps and all that sort of stuff, that has been how other guys have gotten to see how other people coach.
Yeah.
Because those camps usually, are several days to a week long, etc. And then you get to kind of see how everybody kind of works when they work with athletes. So that would be my encouragement, is to find a way to bring something that is digital into kind of the real world, so to speak, and so that you can be face to face.
Yeah, no, that's good. I think, the things like even like the ABCA and stuff like that, I think it's been a big resource for me, just connecting with coaches, playing with some of these ideas and actually getting that face to face. That's good.
I mean, that's how we met first, right?
Yeah, it is.
So, all right. Well, that's all we got for today. Hope you all enjoyed that.
Yeah.
Good marathon.
Yeah. It's long. Good though.
But so that'll be the outro right there, right? But yeah.
Yeah, whoever survived our lengthy conversation, we appreciate it.
But
yeah, whoever made it to the end.
Actually, for some updates though, if I ever do put out blog posts or whatever, or have little short riffs, I don't know if I ever will have a short riff, but I'll put out some shorter content, especially if I write a blog post. I might even read my Twitter posts. I don't know, like riff on that for a minute, but that probably won't be a minute either. So
I was gonna say I might not have a short I might not have a short riff, but I'll have a short riz.
But yeah, anyways, so that's all we got. Hope you enjoyed today's podcast. And where can you find people? Where should you look them up? Also, Baker, do you want to let anybody know what's going on with you? Some new updates, or anybody got life updates that
I can share that
with the listeners.
Yeah, I've recently taken a job as an integration pitching coach with the Mets, which is basically means I'll be able to not just focus on the pitching side, but a little bit of performance side, and then maybe as it grows, it integrates a little bit more into, as you can imagine, all the things you need to integrate within skill. As far as my title is, which is kind of a cool position. But yeah, I'll be starting that depending when this is put out, like in a couple weeks, or again, if we get about before Christmas, about 2 weeks. If not, then I might have already started.
Additionally, Robert and I both have buy me a coffee.
Yeah.
Like if you like the podcast and you want to support us and make a one-time donation. By the way, the donation thing that I have is for Finding the Edge. So if you donate to us and you want it to go to a specific person, for example, like Baker, or even Robert, just put a note in there that's where you want it to go, and
but specifically Baker,
I'll send it off. Yeah. So
specifically.
So, if you like somebody more than me, by all means, put that in there. I'll put that. I'll send it off to them. And yeah. So if you want to support us, that's a way to support us. I'm thinking about, you can do some membership stuff in there. I'm thinking about potentially turning on membership. And as you can see, it sometimes takes me a year to put out content of things that we have recorded. I'm thinking what I would like to do with the membership stuff is just like, I'm going to just take the raw files and just pop them in there. So if you want to be ahead of the game as far as when episodes come out and what's going on with them, and just get way early access, maybe even a year or more early access to stuff, we'll turn on membership stuff, and we'll figure something out there, and I'll just throw unfinished content in there. I also have a thing from Brock. Me and Brock, our first episode, I recorded something, if I can find it. I recorded us just riffing after the episode ended. So I got goodies tucked away as far as content goes, if people are interested. So that might be coming down the pipe. I might have a mentorship thing going. We need to do a whole episode on that anyways. That tweet that I put out that got some traction. And then, yeah. So that's what's going on with me. Robert, what's going on with you?
Yeah, like Garrett said, I have my own Buy Me a Coffee. If you want to support me on here Finding the Edge, that's great. You can support me as well with my YouTube channel. So all of my social links are integrated together. It's Robert Fry 40, ROBERTFREY 40, and it applies to Twitter, it applies to YouTube, it applies to Buy Me a Coffee. So if you know Robert Fry 40, you get access to all of those, and I'm just trying to create as much college baseball analytics as I can. And for any NAIA coach listeners out there, I am doing my 4th year of spray charts at the NAIA level. And so feel free to contact me again, Robert Fry 40, on any of those platforms to learn about details and pricing.
Sweet. I don't know if we could go on forever, but I know Baker, you got to get to something. So I ended our last podcast, by the way, with whatever, like, hey, I probably should get some sleep at some point. I just ended it.
One of these times you got to do a Sopranos-esque podcast where, you'll say, hey, I got to go to